Okay.
Attention, please.
Yo. 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 Yo.
What is going on, everyone? It's David Palmer, Leo King, and Dr. Ann Wohlcke here for History in the Stars. We got quite the show for you today. How are you doing today, Ann?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you. I'm
Good to be
glad that
with
we're
you.
all here and that we aren't at war yet or whatever's happening in the world.
It is really interesting that it almost is the first time I think and I think there's this pride that comes in history about war. This
In
is the
what way?
first, well, to get your side of the fence on, I guess, you need that swag going in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you got to rally up the troops. You got to get the townspeople to be in the side of the king, whatever it might be, right?
Right.
This is the first time it's like, no, it's not happening, but it's happening. Really weird. Like
It is really weird.
We'll use today, for example, June 12th of 2024. I don't even know how to even, I didn't think this would happen, although I believe anything could happen, but Russian warships pulling into Cuba, going by Florida coast. And then the DOD being like, we'll have to get back to you when all the video footage and all the, people aren't stupid. They're seeing it happen and nobody's answering the questions really about it and saying it's just a military drill. But that's exactly what the USSR was saying about Cuba. We're just doing our military alliance with Cuba and putting these missile sites over. So it's really weird right now.
It is really weird. I don't even know what to say, but what I'm sitting here thinking about is when you were talking about this astrology like 2 years ago and this time, and that you knew this time was going to be big, is this ever what you imagined? I mean,
Yeah.
but all of these crazy little things and the way that they're working out it's just from every angle, there's crazy history that seems to be repeating that you did talk about would come around with the astrology. But on top of that, there is the whole layer of, I don't even know, coming like the medical findings and people reacting to that. And on top of that, things like Kevin Spacey or I'm just thinking every single thing that's coming out right now is just weird. Right? It would have been a main, if we still had traditional media that just reported on things, everything could be a headline. Everything that's happening in any normal time in history would have been a headline.
Our last episode, we went in, especially into the Civil War and looking at Neptune at the end of Pisces. And I think the most interesting part of that history is the debates with Lincoln and Douglas and how the media in the South was reporting the debates.
Right.
It reminds me of now, where it's like they take something that's a nothing burger to a lot of people, but it has significance as being like, well, this hasn't happened in history before, right? And make it every day on the media and push that while there's all these huge events happening they don't want to cover. And then when they do cover the big events that are happening, it's like they downplay it. Like, it's just some Russian ships.
Right.
They're doing
That's
a
what's
military
so crazy.
exercise after the week prior. The media is in Normandy for D-Day And that's some interesting history, 80 years. And you have world leaders in the West saying now the actual words that they said they would not say. We got to take out Putin, and we're giving Ukraine the green light to use our weapons in Russian territory and fire into their country. Now, if they wouldn't say that and that wasn't happening, I could maybe go, well, but there's been 2+ years, 2.5 years of NATO and all of these alliances in Europe, and especially the United States of America, supplying, training, and now green lighting weapons into Russia. So to have Russian ships in Cuba, nuclear sub, destroyers, it's not like they just brought some Russian, I don't know, some Russian hat barge with some Russian hats. They brought some serious stuff over. And the history, like the last time when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, it was, of course, missiles. And then the boats tried to come over, and JFK stopped that with the embargo. So to me, they knew the boats were coming. The fact that they don't do anything means it's too hot of a steak to fry on this barbecue that we're at right now, because JFK had the guts to tell the military to fire shots over the front bow of the USSR ships, and then they started to back off. Like, oh, okay, they mean business, right? Where now, if you were to do that, that could cause World War III and a nuclear war. So it really is, I think, a little bit more serious than people are looking at it, astrologically too. I don't know. What do you feel?
When the Cuban Missile Crisis happened in 1962, where was Neptune at that point?
So it's going to be interesting, because we're going to go out of the Neptune Pisces or the Neptune stuff as much for 62, even though there's a buildup to some massive stuff after 62. But what's interesting is it's this Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and so that's why this whole Tippecanoe curse is connected to it, because it's the Jupiter-Saturn cycle that's every 20 years. So if you think of 1960, Jupiter, Saturn follow the same trail they did here in 2020, but they met in Capricorn at the end. 2020, they meet in Aquarius at 0 degrees. So that's definitely significant and shifting, but it also is the same 60-year transit. It always comes back every 60 years, right? To the same zone. So what's interesting is, it's a weird election. The Tippecanoe we'll go into, but like, to me, it's in 62 watching. And if you think of use 2020 as 1960, by 2022, the Ukraine war started.
Right.
By 1962, America's already put in a really weird situation. The military is wanting to do all these things, and the president's pushing back. Whereas now you see the president pushing forward towards this whole Russia thing. What's weird is now we're in that weird third year to fourth year, right? It's technically really like a third, because the president inaugurated the year that technically, if you look at it as a year, in 1961, not 1960, but the election takes place in those years. So of the 0 years. But to look at 1962, it's one of those years that I feel is very important because of the buildups that are happening. And we have to remember the Cold War really kind of gets to its first hot point because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it's just the start of it. It's not like the one moment that happens and that's all that happens, right? There's a lot of things that come after the Cuban Missile Crisis that last all the way until the Reagan days, and also really until the end of, even during Bush Sr. in 1991, when the USSR decides to finally dissolve and it falls.
Right.
And even looking at like the Berlin Wall coming down and all those kind of things, it's connected to World War II in reality, all of it.
Right.
That's just weird,
And
right?
the Berlin Wall wasn't that built in 1961? I think I'd have to look it up. So what I think is interesting is, I shared this picture right before we went. If you could show this headline, This is from the very end of the 16 days in October, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then this is the publication, or this is the New York Times. And I'm not even sure if this is the front page. But, I mean, look at this. We have nothing now that is this clear, black and white. There is no master map that people are working with that's public.
Right.
There may be a master map, but when we started this, you talked about, this idea of rallying for war. You got to rally all the troops and go forward. Here is a completely different era that seems so foreign. And I know, we were all, or the world was scared because we were in this Cold War where the world was so clearly demarcated between, the West and the East, and everybody had allied behind it. So we could see the alliances just out there. You can put a map in the New York Times and everybody knows, okay, well, South Vietnam is a place where there's a threat of guerrilla war, right? There's this map telling everybody this is what we're worried about. And then it's just open and clear here about every aspect of it, right? For what they want the public to know, of course. But it's all here. There's everything spelled out about what's going on in the world and why we should be on board and why we should care as good Americans reading the New York Times. Now, is anything... It's so jumbled, and
Very
there's
jumbled.
if you tried to put up a map right now of where are U.S. interests in the world, we can't keep track, right? And there's no clear line, in my opinion, of
No, there's not. Though.
what makes sense. Like, okay, where are we allied, or what are we doing with NATO and what's going on? Like, it just doesn't connect to anything. It's so just mixed up.
It is very mixed up.
So
It's a very weird chart, but also a very extreme chart, in my opinion, because what you see in October, it's really October of 1962 that we see it get hot, but it starts in July. It moves through, but then it gets to the actual blockade, and then the Russians look at that as an act of aggression on October 24th of 1962. And if we look at that, it's a really hot moment. Mars is conjunct the North Node in Leo. The Neptune that you wanted to know about was in Scorpio at that time at 12 degrees, so Neptune had just squared the nodes through that summer, right? Now, that's what we are coming into. Or sorry, that's what we already went through in 2020, ironically enough. Now we're coming towards North Node to meet with Neptune in 2025. We also see Saturn in Aquarius on the South Node. So that was a Mars and Saturn opposition on the nodes with a T-square to Neptune, right, in Scorpio. And then it was a Venus retrograde as well. And Venus, if you look at it, it was doing just 3 minutes. So that means it had just started to retro. Yeah, it's in front of the sun. So it retrograded in Scorpio. It wasn't doing the Venus retrograde in Sag anymore. So it's kind of an intense chart because of the Mars, Saturn, Neptune, T-square on the nodes. And at the same token, we do see Jupiter and Chiron conjunct in Pisces, and they're both retrograde. So both the benefics are retrograde, both the malefics are direct, and they're both in opposition on the nodes.
So does that mean that there would have been eclipses conjunct Mars and Saturn also, or the eclipses didn't happen around this point?
So the eclipses would have been with like the lunar eclipse with Saturn in Aquarius. And then if you actually look back, Jupiter went retrograde while it was in Pisces. So the eclipses weren't with Jupiter. So that would have been a moment about Saturn South Node eclipses. Now, the last time that we had Saturn South Node eclipses was 2020.
So does that mean then that as an astrologer, you see where there's something about now that's connected to this time?
What gets me the most is that Mars in Leo in opposition to Saturn. We're about to go through Mars that's going to retrograde in Leo at that same degree. Okay. And then retrograde back into Cancer while Pluto is doing its retrograde back into Capricorn. And then Mars will oppose it in opposition. And then at the end, when it finally stations direct at the beginning of 2025, it will meet in opposition at 0 Leo to Pluto at 0 Aquarius. And so we're going to have a very tense Mars opposition to Pluto for the last part of the fall through the whole entire winter and into the end of winter. And that is going to be very volatile, very extreme, very war, and it can become at its ugliest, unfortunately. Especially because Mars and Pluto both rule Scorpio. So if you think about it, that's a big, weird aspect. Plus, we have Uranus that is in Taurus. So back then, Uranus, of course, not in Taurus, but it's in Virgo, and it's with Pluto, and that's where the Uranus-Pluto conjunction was building up to come in 1964. So at least there was some sort of relief. Now, what's really interesting is Pluto and Uranus are going to be in a nice trine as we see Uranus ingress into Gemini. That's going to be starting to technically build next year, but come into more 2026 and especially in 2027. So there is a Pluto-Uranus positive moment coming to kind of like break up all this crazy stuff and move it into some sort of better place. But we got to go through the kind of ugly thing first. So that's what's interesting to me is it's connected to the Pluto-Uranus conjunction, but this is still the old Pluto-Uranus conjunction of the one that was prior. So, it's like, here's Uranus heading towards Pluto. Now we're getting ready to see the trine after they met in 64. That's how long Uranus-Pluto takes. Right? So they're two outer planets, and the longest, farthest outer planet to the most inner. It's a long cycle. But at least there was some sort of like knowing there was going to be a breakup of all this stuff really kind of quick. And also, that's where you do get the whole idea of the 60s and really like this idea of like peace, love, and changing the way that we look at reality. But there was also the big oppositions to Saturn that was coming to that Pluto-Uranus conjunction. So people born in like 64 and 65 have like, you see it in their charts, Pluto-Uranus, opposite Saturn, Chiron, and Pisces, I always call these people like, nuclear silos that have been waiting their whole life to have this huge spiritual energy actually be pushed, but it's almost a fear in themselves, like pushing the same nuclear button of their spiritual power. So there's like a tense energy about power and how it's used. And everybody's kind of hesitant to use it, right? Where now there is not hesitancy.
Okay. Well, what I was going to ask also is about this time, if you look at the chart, what about this era makes the leadership of the different sides of the Cold War, what made them so certain and entrenched in their beliefs that their side was right? Why are there two big sides at this time? Now I feel like there are all these little players chiming in. I don't know what else to say.
That's a good question. Because World War II does make United States the actual new dominant superpower of the world after the war, not before.
Right.
a lot of that has to do with one, Pluto moving at that time from Cancer to come up above, like I had talked about in last episode. Like we find Pluto in 1930. Ironically, it's happened to be in the sign of Cancer because that's the axis, Cancer Capricorn, that we see Pluto come above the celestial equator or below, right? And so it goes way far south in declination, and then it rises up north in declination. And so that was the rise north. America's a Cancer, so it was the rise of the Pluto, right? Ironically, America's moon is in Aquarius. So, and it's at those early degrees where Saturn and the South Node are in 62. But to go back to the Cold War and that power of the split between two countries, it's kind of weird because it happens because of a third country, because of Germany. Right? And it happens because of the country that starts the whole World War II cycle, but they're gone, but they split up the technology. And what's interesting is that's all Uranus and Gemini at that time. And if you actually look at it, that's like Pluto Leo. So there's that. Now we're in the opposite of Pluto Aquarius, where it's like the stolen technology has now been dispersed to everybody else, where only people held it like kings would hold their best night or hold their best gold. Mm-hmm. Pluto and Leo is very, I'm going to hold on to where I have the dominant energy of the sun energy or the power of things. But Pluto and Aquarius is like, well, by this time, enough people have tried to just make it by and sold things or given up a secret here or secret there or whatever. And now we're in Pluto and Aquarius. So it's more of an equal playing field.
Okay.
Of power. So, but that hot button now is, I think, a little bit harsher because at least in Pluto and Leo, it is kind of more of a flex of a dramatic show. But in Aquarius, there is I've reached my limit. I don't care. I will disrupt. So that's where that Saturn South Node came in, but that was also a South Node. So the illusion of the disruption is more of the illusion than the actuality. Whereas we are actually moving into, with North Node still here in Aries, seeing Mars and Uranus getting closer here in the next couple weeks, and as we come into July, that's pretty. With the star Algol, the demon star, in conjunction. And the reason why the Tippecanoe comes up, because if you were to just look at this chart right now, like we're looking at, and this will be a fun experiment astrologically for people, right? To understand Jupiter-Saturn cycles. Stop. It doesn't want to stop.
Of course it doesn't want to stop.
I know. Like, really? What? You can't make this up.
See, it's been crazy all over the place.
I'm. It's kind of fun. I mean, this is the new 18 that they're calling Sequoia. So obviously, this is a problem already. Like, but it sucks because it's such a problem that it won't let me actually like. It's not even showing that as a problem. Like, it's not even showing it up as an issue. Showing Finder too as a Google, which is kind of interesting. Like that clears that. Let's force quit that. Let's force quit that. Let me force quit Astro Gold. Maybe that will.
You've still got your arrows.
Wow.
only
There we
knew
go.
how-
There we go.
This is just the evening.
Yes, if I go back. So what I would tell people to look at is see Saturn there in Aquarius and Jupiter in Pisces, right? Let's just now switch this and bring this to 2022. Here we go. Let me move the chart to 0 Aries just to make things a little bit easier for people. So Saturn in Aquarius, Jupiter in Pisces. Because Jupiter and Saturn met in the same area every 60 years, like 2000 was Jupiter, Saturn, and Taurus. So every 20 years we see the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and it's the most reliable on those 0 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, then you just do, okay, let's just move it one more year, right? And it's like, okay, there's Jupiter in Aries, right? One more year, there's Jupiter in Taurus, right? Okay, and that's where we're at now. Now it's going into Gemini. So if I go back now to 64, right? 1964. Right? Jupiter Aries going into Taurus. There's Saturn in Aquarius. That's, of course, January 1st. But you can see how there's this pattern that's happening with it.
So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happens on those 0 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been happening a lot longer than the curse of Tippecanoe, right? It's
Correct.
I mean, and you were mentioning how those are the times when you see leadership changes, sometimes in the curse way of the leader dying early, but also there were powerful leadership changes with monarchs that you were talking about that happened during these years as well. So,
well, like here's 1940, Jupiter, Saturn, Taurus, right? I just am going to go using Jupiter conjunct Saturn, right? Mm-hmm. So it meets a couple times in 1940, 1921, 1901, 1881, 1861, 1842, 1802, right? So it's on this 20-year cycle that's around those 0 years. And that's where some of those curses come like a year within. It's not the exact moment, although it can be. But like the way that I've seen it play out, which I did have that open, but I can pull it back up here on my open AI here. On this U.S. president. So I did this as, what are the presidents elected in 0 years ending at 0, starting from 1800 to in 20-year cycles. And I said, what's unique? So 1800, Thomas Jefferson, the election was significant for the intense rivalry and resulted in a tie between Jefferson and Aaron Burr, leading to the election being decided by the House of Representatives. And that's what prompts the passage of the 12th Amendment, which changes the electoral process. Plus, I say this a lot to people, but 1800 is the year where you can no longer change the old amendments. You can only add on new. 1820, Monroe, nobody ran against him. So the only president to ever run without an opposing party as president, as a nominee, but a vice president. There was a vice president for the Federalists, but there was nobody running. So that's a shoo-in. 1840, Harrison. He had the log cabin and the hard cider campaign. So this is what's weird is that's very popular. People drink hard cider for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right?
he died mysteriously.
And then he died 31 days into his term, right?
In his log cabin with his cider.
Right. And then 1860s, the weird one with Lincoln. And of course, as it occurred on the eve of the American Civil War, Lincoln's elections led to the secession of several states. 1880, Garfield, I'm related to him. He led in reforms in all these systems, including with the Native Americans and making sure that they don't try and force Christianity on them. But he dies in front of a bank, ironically enough, and gets shot and killed. 1900, William McHenry. His reelection was focusing on imperialism and prosperity. He was a Republican. He assassinated in 1901, and that's who brought Theodore Roosevelt to his presidency. And that was like right at the beginning too, which is really interesting. Like, I think it was in a matter of 3 months, right? And he was all about the gold standard too, right? And then Harding is another one who dies. Following World War I, his presidency is often noted for scandals that emerged after his death. And that's what brings in FDR, who on 1940's election, it's the only third-term president. Right? And then that's also, we go into World War II. And he's the only president to be, I think, in a wheelchair, right? That at that time, because of third term, right? And it's weird because he is the third term and he broke the tradition set by George Washington.
Right.
So he is kind of, I mean, you know, that's what scares me about Biden is that's the president that's sitting in the Oval Office as the picture of the president over the fireplace in the Oval Office. That's always kind of the president you look at to see what the president thinks like. And he thinks like FDR, and FDR broke every rule there pretty much was. Social wise, packing the Supreme Court, breaking traditions set by George Washington.
But that's what I thought. He passed away.
He passed away
through his fourth term.
His fourth term. And that's when they swapped vice presidents to get Truman in there during the DNC during World War II. He didn't even like Truman.
Right.
The party chose for him because his president or his vice president was helped him get the farming vote. That Roosevelt didn't care about the farmers. He acted like he did. It was the vice president that was in that cared and trusted the vice president. But then when they got Truman in there, the farmers didn't, but they were all in war and getting into war. And right, so, and then who pushes the bomb? Truman. And FDR dies in office. So there is something weird about all these cycles of somebody dying or them dying, whether it's a vice president or a duel or, you know, a contested election, a lot of contested election stuff, 1800. And then, of course, Ronald or JFK, of course, being the youngest president and the first televised debate and wins over Richard Nixon. And then, of course, ends up getting assassinated, right? And being truly, I would say, the first modern president of since Washington to actually be, sure, he's part of the Democratic Party, but he's not looked at as a Democrat. They even call him a Kennedy Democrat because he's really the bringing back of the old Democratic Republican Party in many ways. He's a centrist. He's in the middle. And he's a president that every side in politics agrees and likes. Like, there's not a Republican who doesn't like JFK, and there's not a Democrat who doesn't like JFK. He really is kind of the bringing back of, I think that's the irony of right before him on the cycle is the president that everybody really hates unless you're really liberal and you love socialistic stuff and breaking all of the constitutional laws.
But FDR also was, he was beloved by a lot of people. He really was. I mean,
the Great Depression was happening under him.
It pulled people out of the Depression. And so they were, I think people were happy to have their lives turn around in that way for the policies that were, for the people who were so affected by the Depression. But it was a situation where he was able to take a lot of, do a lot and take a lot of whatever you would call that, like do things that hadn't been done before, be an innovative president because people were distracted by the Depression. And it was sort of, we need to do what it takes to get out of this. And then we need to do what it takes to win the war. And right. I mean, it was
he closes the banks.
Right.
He gets the Federal Reserve to take over. They were actually going to pass out promissory notes when they closed the banks down. They went, that probably won't look good. Right. He packs the Supreme Court to get the big New Deal through and Social Security through, which the Supreme Court had deemed that was illegal, to tax Americans and to also then have the government hold the money because they know that the government won't be responsible with the money and put it into savings, which we now know is true. Like the money that's allocated for Social Security, we don't have. They never save the money. So everybody that puts their checks since Social Security, that money that's been used in Vegas basically, right? Like as an analogy, it's been thrown out into marketplaces. It's been thrown back into the reserve to, oh, let's give the money somewhere else and say, oh yeah, but it's still there. So nobody that's paid into Social Security, it's not in an account waiting to be used.
No. I remember learning in high school civics, my teacher said, Social Security will run out before you guys are old enough to collect it. So it's always sort of just been, oh, there's my donation to people who need it now.
Right.
Anyway.
But I think that's the irony, is like the George Washington breakaway. And then I feel like JFK is kind of the Washington-like president to first come back to really go, it's not about my party. It's not what the government can do, but what you can do for your country.
Right.
You know, it's a huge shift that has never happened. And the most loved, I would say he's the most loved president.
You know what's really interesting about
Since
that?
George Washington.
Yeah,
Because I wouldn't say that Abraham Lincoln's loved.
No.
They
Right? You
secede,
can't say he's loved when
all the
half the
people of
country
those
hates
time, they were horrible people, but
right.
He's not a loved president.
Mm-hmm. I think it's, that JFK brought so much hope, right, for this new generation. There's going to be real change. That's the kind of thing that Obama tried to tap into. But so many things actually did change with JFK. But you know what I think is interesting about it, what I was sitting here thinking as the British historian that I am, don't you think it's odd that JFK, right, his whole presidency was called Camelot?
I know,
that they
love
threw back to King Arthur and the knights and this mythical, wonderful place. And even with all that we know was going on behind the scenes with JFK, his wife, Jackie, was just emulated for her fashion and beloved. And the children were it was so exciting to have kids in the White House. I don't know, like I've only read all the history. I feel like after his assassination, probably a lot of people really romanticized the era even more. But I'm pretty sure that it was thought of to be like Camelot. And so it's interesting to me that even though he says that line about do what you can't, not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, I guess that's like a good kind of king. The king who's rallying you to do things for yourself, to make space for you to be able to do have your best life. That the role of government is to allow you the space to do that, right?
Yeah,
but he's thought of as being a monarch is against what George Washington ever wanted, right?
Right.
But he's not obviously a monarch, and I don't think he thought of himself as that. But It's interesting that that's how people feel they have to embrace a leader that they really love, is that we connect it to royalty. And I feel like that's a big part of our problem now, is that why do we're still looking for these legacies attached to names?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what JFK, though, kind of gets away from, is having everybody look at the names and look at themselves. And then he goes up against the military, right? They're the ones who want to go into Cuba and take out the weapons. And they're doing reconnaissance. And they're like, don't get shot down. Because and then that's where he also is that president that brings his family very close in. Right. And so maybe that's kind of the Camelot thing too. But, and he's also a physically conservative Democrat, which is after FDR, who literally is what we're still dealing with today as the problem. And then what's interesting is you think how you brought up Jackie and the fashion, because JFK's presidency mirrors the Jupiter-Saturn cycle that we're in now. It's so weird that JFK, the most loved president, it's now pretty much factual that Biden is the most not liked president of all time, or the most embarrassing as well, where nobody was embarrassed of JFK, right? And he has like JFK is one of the highest approval ratings too.
Right.
And then now it's like the lowest. And all of the pop culture that Aquarius, Jupiter, Saturn brings, with like the TikTokers to the White House, were all they were rejected by the people, right? Like, I have nothing against all these different movements, but the people that they hired to put up were rejected by the people, like the Dylan Mulvaney or all that stuff. And then you don't see the first lady being revered or looked up to.
No. Yeah. I have this
And
picture.
the dog is...
Do they have a dog?
The dog has been
Bidens
kicked out of the house for how many people it's bitten. Secret Service people,
no.
all of that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then also that Biden kicks the dog and abuses the dog.
Oh, no.
And then, so the dog's gone now. And it's a German Shepherd. And cocaine found in the White House that nobody can still... Right, so like so that kind of reminds me of JFK, because they're said to be in the Oval or in the White House, like a secret green room that, you know, him and his brother and all that used to bring girls into, that they built in there. The pool used to be still at the White House, and all of the staff used to go into the pool while Jackie went on first lady duties away.
But then,
whereas now Biden's nowhere to be found at the White House.
Like, if you look at this, I don't know if you can show this picture, just because I thought it's interesting that it says the dawn of Camelot, JFK's inauguration. And when you look at the picture, because I actually just was searching, because I think I remember that he might have been the last president to wear a top hat to his inauguration. I have to look that up. And so I thought, okay, I want to see the picture. And he is wearing a top hat, and everybody is looking so formal and nice. Jackie's smiling away, and off they go. And we know now so much more about what was happening behind the scenes during this presidency. And
even that he was a president that died behind closed doors of his Atkinson's disease, and then they revived him and brought him back and didn't tell the public.
I mean, it was such a different time,
you know?
too. Even FDR, right, had to hide from people, or wanted to hide that he was in a wheelchair.
Right.
Which, I mean, come on. That would not go over today, that you want to hide your disability, right? But he did whatever he could to never be seen in his wheelchair. And so I don't know, though. There was still so much being hidden at this time as well, but it's really just a different time, so that it's all being hidden. But it's like, even by the time you get to Bill Clinton, it's fallen apart, right? Where, okay, there's a lot going on behind the scenes in the Oval Office and wherever else with Bill Clinton as well. But he wasn't able to pull it off like his hero, JFK. Right, because isn't there a famous picture of Bill Clinton shaking John F. Kennedy's hand somewhere? Yeah.
And I think the other thing about JFK is, like, he's the first Catholic president, so there was a lot of America who was questioning that, but it's worth the risk over Nixon, because it was the first televised debate. So that televised debate, Nixon looked like an old man that really was unhappy, and JFK smiles. Plus the stories that were going through Life magazine back then of all these, the new suburban 50s housewife was, oh, he's handsome. So it's the first handsome president. It's the first president that gets the women to go, well, I wouldn't mind him coming to the house, honey. right? So, he's like in Good Housekeeping, like he's a thought of women as they're vacuuming in the 50s or at the beginning of the 60s, like,
And the funniest thing to me also, if we look at this picture and if we think about today, there's so many things that are different. And I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm pining away for Camelot, right? Even though we probably could use a good King Arthur. But now Robert F. Kennedy Jr., right, can't speak publicly without people trying to discredit him in some way, or it's just like they have gone so far out of their way to try to uphold the Kennedy legacy on one hand, while also making sure we don't talk about the wrong Kennedys or the wrong Kennedy, because there's only one wrong Kennedy right now. And I just really find that also ironic and just a testament of our times that the media was obviously so far behind presenting the images of the first family at this time, right?
Right.
And the media now is trying desperately to present some sort of image that isn't sticking, that not everybody will get behind. There is no new Camelot. I don't know what it is.
Well,
Arkham
I
Asylum.
have from First Rate Madness, the book about clinical psychology and how leaders, and they call it Sickness in Camelot with Kennedy, that he should never have survived into his 30s, much less become a great president because of his Atkinson's disease. He was on steroids.
And what is
and
what is that disease?
And he was on amphetamine too. So Atkinson's it's an autoimmune disorder to where he gets sick with a cold and it lasts 2 months. So it's before steroids come out to help boost the immune system. And right as he becomes the senator, steroids come out. So that helps him get through, because when he'd get sick, he'd be out. Or if he got a cut and he got infected, he'd be out for 3 months. Right? So his whole life, he was super sick. And then finally the meds come out, and then they push him on the amphetamines and barbiturates for his hyperthymic, because he used to go around Washington when he was a senator and say, I'm not going to let you drive, because all the senators and the House representatives all had a driver, right? And he would kick the driver out, get into the Lincoln Town Car, and that was before stop sign or stop lights. They had the stop sign people, and he'd cuss at the stop, get out of my way, and then he'd just yank over, and that's a hyperthymic temperament person. So he's not bipolar, he's always on the higher spectrum of things, right? Like more in him, he's not manic, but he's hyperthymic, so he's super positive but also very moving around energetically and always thinking he was a Gemini. But it's weird, because if you think of the same transit we have Biden, is he alive? Like, what medication is he on? And they're even trying to have to where it's like Biden needs to take a drug test before he does this debate, because what we need to know, what is he taking? Is he on? Everybody's assuming he's on amphetamines. So there's a connection of the amphetamine presidents too with this transit. Isn't that weird?
There's so much. Also the other thing about JFK was he had been injured in World War II, right? I had to read Profiles in Courage in high school at some point, and he was on the PT 109, right? And was injured and was stranded at sea for I don't know how long. So he also had those back injuries, I think, from that.
Yeah. So this is in the book where it's from presidential records and so forth, that from June 22nd to July 3rd, he also received higher doses of oral steroids, amphetamines, and his usual daily dose of testosterone. All the penicillin and steroid injections produced great pain in the gluteal and thigh regions, with marked oozing, a puncture site, because that was the thing, is he'd bruise easy. If he got cut, it would stay a cut longer with Atkinson's disease, for which he received doses of narcotic codeine. So he's on codeine, he's on barbiturates, he's on steroids, he's on testosterone, and he's on amphetamine. Right? Just to keep him alive, just to keep him going through the presidency. The press was told that the president had a mild viral infection. So it begs the question, astrologically and historically, the history is repeating itself with a Catholic president on the same Jupiter Saturn, and one that's on massive amount of meds and very sick and not there, and telling the public it's just a mild infection. But really, for that whole entire week, they are pumping him full of everything they got. Just stay fucking alive. Because he died while in office and they revived him back. So it is a little bit weird, if you ask me. But if I take away this really quick of you and I, it says June 22nd was the turning point. The president could have died, but at some point all the steroids and penicillin kicked in. He came back to life. That Kennedy and his aides had severe illness is not the point of the story. Kennedy thought American people wanted a healthy president. He might have learned from FDR, just as you were saying, that the American people could handle, even admire, a sick president. Despite the cover-up, Kennedy deserves respect for all the suffering he endured, for his most survival in the face of long odds, for his remarkable resilience. Most notable people with half his medical problems and a fraction of his wealth would have retired to a quiet, easy life. And on June 26 of 1961, 4 days after the president began his turnaround, urine culture finally confirmed the cause of his infection, which today is commonly known as, this is a dangerous bug, which is a venereal disease, basically, a sexual disease. Right? So even now, fatal in 20 to 40% of cases, high mortality, and mainly infects those of immune compromise, like the hospitalized, elderly, or small children, and by his Atkins disease and stuff. So that was the thing, is he also had, look at it, it's found in the vaginal flora. It's a sexually transmitted disease. He literally was also dealing with STDs while in office that he was getting by his promiscuity while in office.
I wonder what Biden's up to.
Well, I think that's the weird thing, is like, sniffing some hair. I don't know. I like your picture a lot better, but I just wanted to give people that context of like some actual history and some actual verified from a very prominent psychiatrist in an amazing book. I always recommend it to people. First Rate Madness, about all the biggest world leaders are not normal.
Right. You know, as we were talking about, there's another one that we can freeze on for a little bit, but as we were talking about JFK, I started to think about, as I sometimes do since I'm a British historian and I'm a historian of the 18th century, George III, because he became monarch in 1760, and we were looking at that earlier, I think. And so was there also the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction as George III came to office? He is an important president for the United States. Monarch for the United States, since we revolted against him. But it's so interesting that he's another Gemini, I believe. And he struggled with his own mental illness, or his own illness, which was mental illness. And so much of that was hidden. But it's interesting to me that his story's being told right now on Bridgerton, or not, well, I guess on Bridgerton too, but there is the spinoff of the Netflix series Bridgerton, Queen Charlotte. And they look at George III's madness, and they look at the marriage, and they show how there's a lot about the show that's historically inaccurate. But what is interesting is that they show this innovative treatment being done by the doctor. And it's true that they were trying out new therapies on George III. In the same way, they're trying out new therapies on JFK. Right. And it was mental illness, but before the time of George III, mental illness was just sort of thought to be a moral failing, that it was something that you had a demon or something, right? They didn't really understand it. They would use the humoral belief about you bleed people, or you somehow deal with their humor.
Just get some skull.
You could get the skull medicine, right?
You know.
And George III had a doctor who did the old sort of things, but also brought in this new style of let's get him out working. That work was good for people to be physically active, which was different for this time. They also used straitjackets, unfortunately, and sort of shocking him into reality with cold baths and some things that were really torturous. But all of that was done to try to keep him reigning also. And eventually it had to go into the Regency. But, you know, if JFK had lived years and years and continued to reign, maybe that's what would have happened with him as well. But I just think it's really interesting to see the parallels between those two as well.
Yeah, it is, because in 1760, it's Jupiter on its way to meet with Saturn, but it's going to be happening in the sign after Aquarius, right? So it's interesting because the Mad King comes in as Jupiter by the end of 1760, coming into 1761, is coming in with Pisces. And that's what's really interesting to me, is it does come with like that Mad King kind of end of Pisces energy.
Interesting.
But also, if you think about it, like the American Revolution happens in the same 20-year cycle.
Right.
And then 1780 comes, there's a Jupiter Saturn, and the first president is not, he's elected, but he's not really elected how we elect presidents today. He's done within the 13 states and their convention and all that during the Constitutional Convention. And then they wait a little bit of time and then they put him up. So it's kind of interesting to me, though, because that's like, if I were to say like 20 years from now, we don't think about it because we think so close to us right now. But, you know, the real Mad King, president, executive, head of something, that's more of 2040. So, which I wouldn't be surprised for some weird stuff.
Well, I was thinking about this era also because this is the time where Britain is trying to expand its power, and it's growing as an empire. It's the American Revolution that really kind of gives it its first speed bump in acquiring territories and developing its power. But so it's actually creating a side of the world, or a unit, a global unit for the first time. So if we look at the Cold War, where the United States has kind of taken over, the United States and the Soviet Union, right, have taken on the role of the empires of that era. And in 1760, Great Britain was formulating its empire. And even though it lost the American colonies, it went on to become an even bigger empire throughout the 19th century.
Right.
So I just think that's interesting as well, that we're seeing that there's a connection to this period of time where we think of the American Revolution and we think of the natal return chart for the United States as a country, but you can still see that even before that, there were these movements happening that were consolidating powers and shifting leaders also.
And it also is kind of like bringing in that old energy of those leaders. But then where does the buck stop with that? Like, you know, JFK is like, no, I'm not like FDR. Right. So it also kind of removes that whole alliance that is built to create the Allied forces and breaks it. And if you kind of compare it to today's news, literally today's news and today's...
Which story from today? There is so much news.
That's true, but the fact that we have now Russian subs in Cuba, so like 4 Russian warships, including a nuclear sub, now sitting 200 miles off the coast of Florida, right? So the Russians are in Cuba, and the way that the White House is saying it, the false Camelot is saying, well, it's not the same because we can't verify that they're carrying missiles. What do you mean? That submarine has nuclear missiles in it.
Exactly.
They don't need to put them on the Cuban country into the forest and try and hide them.
Right.
Right? So, like, that's what's, this is like Cubans looking at the Russian fleet come in. And to me, like, people are taking pictures. There's a Russian submarine.
The Civil War. We were talking about the Civil War.
And that's where the first submarine.
Like, oh, let's watch this battle.
And it was the Confederates who built the first submarine, ironically.
Wow.
Right? And there's it with the V, right? Going past Havana, Cuba. Now this has missiles that are crazy. All right, this destroyer right here does not mess around. See that gun turret right there? There's side stuff right here that goes up, right? So there's missiles and launchers right here that are just even more better and satellite tracked, better than what was around in 1962 in Cuba. And there's 4 plus the nuclear sub.
And they probably don't even need to be this close, right? Or to be able to hit their targets.
Oh, no.
Guessing.
So then the Russian defense minister said, we're doing training drills for things that are around 360 miles away, which Florida's 200 miles away.
Well, what's 360
America.
miles? But what part of it?
They don't have to say that. That's the whole, like, you want to keep messing around in Ukraine? We're here. We have our nukes right here. But that to freak the public out would be the worst thing the Biden administration could do. So they say, it's not, you can't conflate it. That's what they said. Because they're not putting missiles in the country. It's like, oh no, they're docking to have a submarine. Number one, I was in the Navy. We don't do it. We don't just like pop submarines out. So they're not at a Navy base. You don't ever see a submarine. They're under the ground, underwater, and then they go through hidden ports and they are loaded where you never are seen, right? This is a demonstration of, hi, we're here. Don't mess around. So to see a sub is like very rare. And then anybody who knows that has family that are nuclear in the Navy, even if your son or daughter is on there, you don't even know what their orders are, because everybody on a nuclear sub has secret clearance, and they're not allowed to say.
Go out for like 6 months.
They can go.
See them, or
there is no time limit because it is nuclear powered.
That would be the last place I'd ever want to be.
Right, anyway. And then it's loaded with nukes. Right. And then it was welcomed by a 21 cannon salute from Cuba. So I really am like looking at this as like, huh.
But how is this being reported then?
It's being reported that,
like, what's the headline at the top of this? And was this even front page news?
Nuclear. Well, the New York Post put it as 4 Russian warships, including a nuclear sub, now sitting 200 miles off the coast of Florida. But the rest of the world is putting it as, we'll use CNN, Russian ships arrive in Cuba as Cold War allies strengthen their ties.
What?
Right?
Okay.
That's a video of a destroyer coming. That's actually a frigate, but it's got destroyer capabilities. The 21 gun salute, right? But, the Gorskov is one of the Russian Navy's most modern ships. and was followed by the nuclear-powered sub, the Kazan, a rescue tug, and an oil tanker. They're now docked in berths usually occupied by cruise ships. Oh, yeah, that's normal.
Cubans will be permitted to tour the frigate following the arrival. The vessels will carry out a 5-day official visit to the Caribbean island, a show of Russian force just 90 miles from Florida. And that's the last part of this is CNN?
No, then the Russian diplomat told CNN the general public in Cuba will be allowed to tour, believe it's capable of long-range missions, anti-submarine warfare, and carrying surface-to-surface to also surface-to-air missiles, among other weapon systems. So like this ship is not... This ship is worse than what the Cuban Missile Crisis was, plus with the sub, both of them together. That's the perfect picture right there, right? Like you're looking at what can destroy a country right there, right? So that was the thing. I don't know if you remember, but in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was the fears of to the East Coast and the southeast of America, because the missiles were long range enough to reach Washington, to reach Georgia, to reach Florida, to reach the Carolinas. They weren't able to reach California. They weren't able to reach Oregon. So the people on the West Coast were like, well,
right.
Sucks to be you guys. Whereas like these, it's like more striked and determined targets that of course are 320 miles, but the nuclear could go off anywhere from that. And the U.S. Navy's monitoring the exercises, right? But this is kind of like the karma in America's face, because we, like NATO got mad that Russia was doing its own exercises in its own territory by the borders in their own territory and got mad at them for that. And that's what started this whole Ukraine war again, but mainly NATO being involved. So that's what's really weird now is America's going like, well, I guess we're going to have to let them get really close since we get really close to them.
Right.
And the media is also trying to downplay it. Like, don't worry, but stopover does not represent a threat. See?
Yeah, I was just looking in that. It said something like they're pointing out that, oh, this has happened every year since 2013. Or what did it say? It was the last thing that you had up. It said they were trying to explain it away as, where is it?
They have Russian ships, threat. Not naval ships.
Russian ships every year between 2013 and 2020.
Not naval, not submarine, not nuclear subs, not the newest destroyer. That's why the tugboats with them and the oil tanker. This is not normal. Especially with where it's at right now. So astrologically speaking, it's really weird that in many ways, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the Ukraine war's beginning, right? Because it began the whole like nuclear talk of like Russia saying we got nukes, don't start doing this. That's the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're now farther along in the astrology of where we didn't cross the line. We've crossed the line now. So as an astrologer, I would say, what's the correlation? 2022 should have not happened. There should have been restraint. Like if it's Ukraine doing it, that's great. But supporting Ukraine and puts us into it. And then last week, especially the astrology of World War II is playing itself to the actual points to where it does have its actual start date, to invasions into Poland and all that stuff. That's what we're in. So this is not a moment to say, well, we all know in the media now, if it doesn't say it represents a threat, it probably does. The downplaying of it is crazy. And Cuba had long good relations with Russia, and they're trying to remind people that, because it hosted nuclear missiles during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Hello, what? It's hosting the missiles right now.
The arrival of ships on Wednesday signals Moscow's strengthening ties with Havana in light of Russia's war in Ukraine. What? It's just so calmly presented. It's just totally normal.
Well, you know what? That's what's weird about this curse at Tippecanoe, which some people don't know it as that. And it actually is from Native American curse. But they don't associate it with the astrology, right? They associate it with this leader in a Native American tribe who was defeated in the 1811 Battle of Tippecanoe by the military expedition led by William Henry Harrison. And it had cursed the great white fathers. So they think that this is the death of all of these presidents or the bad situations that happened because of what happened with Native Americans. Although, ironically, he does it in 1811, so it's not really caught up to some sort of curse on a 0 year or the 20-year cycles. Unless he was a great astrologer, I don't know. Maybe. Right? So it's really weird because if you think about what has been missing from the Biden 2020 Jupiter Saturn, that's the same as Kennedy's, has been a Cuban Missile Crisis situation. Everything else has been playing itself out in weird and extreme forms, and here it is, and he's not doing anything about it. Nowhere to be found to talk about it either. At least JFK came up and said, this is what's happening.
Right.
But so the curse of Tippecanoe, they only started in 1840 because of this. They don't count the James Monroe because there was no contender, although they should, because it's mainly about the elections being weird, then preceded by all the weird events that come. Because if you think of Jupiter, it's expansive and Saturn is retractive. So Saturn represents authority figures. So it looks really good coming in, but then it meets with Saturn. So what's also interesting is now we're in the Jupiter square Saturn moment. So if we go to the astrology and we actually go, okay, JFK's death in November of, I forgot the exact day. It was in Scorpio, I think, or something. Or the end of Saturday.
15th for some reason.
Was it 22nd? It was first day of Saturday, something like that. November
22nd.
I was right. Yep, I'm pretty good. I remember those little things. 1963, and
what time did it happen?
I think it was in the morning. It was or late morning. I think it was like 10 something in Dallas, Texas.
It says approximately 12:30 p.m. in Dallas. So that is.
Yeah. Have you ever been there?
I have not, but I want to.
Oh.
My brother went there recently and told me all about walking around, and he's read everything to do with it, so he could reenact the whole thing.
Well, when I was there with Craig,
yes,
we both, check each other, and we both agree it was from the grassy knoll. There's no way you would have been up in that warehouse at that. You can go to the window. They tell you're not allowed to take pictures, but that was right when the iWatch came out. So I could be holding my phone looking at it and just being click, 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 click.
They say you can't take pictures.
No, when you're in there, you can't take pictures.
Why?
I don't know. I did. But, you see the route that JFK comes, you would have just taken him right there. He waits till he turns and then goes at an angle and is going towards the bridge, going the opposite direction and out of a line of sight to shoot. And if you look at the videotape, his head goes back.
Right.
So it's either grassy knoll, because that would be the right spot, or somebody in the car from that. That's the other one. It looks
Wasn't that the thing that just came out? Was the
it looks
Secret
like
Service
in the car. But being there, it definitely is a. Oh my, yeah, Dallas. So there's Saturn still in Aquarius. So what's interesting is like that transit, because it happened at the end of Capricorn, it's a little behind, right? Like we're in Saturn Pisces. So he's through the Saturn Aquarius and doesn't make it to Saturn Pisces. It's Johnson that makes it in. And Jupiter and Saturn in sextile. We're already now coming to the Jupiter-Saturn square. So if you just were to follow the months, or here, I'll do that right now. Let's do Jupiter square Saturn. That's what we're coming into. And that was in 65. And that happens while Saturn's in Pisces, where it's going to be, and Jupiter in Gemini. So if you actually go, oh, okay, what happened in 1965? Well, that's during civil rights movement, right? Johnson's the president, and the date of the exact date of the actual square is July 6th of 65. So if we actually look, July 6th, well, we sent a Mariner to Mars, spacecraft to Mars. The Vietnam
this?
War,
I have,
right? The escorting bombing raid. Okay.
but I have pulled up July 6th, 1965 says the United States Senate voted 68-5 to approve the proposed 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, clearing the way to change the presidential succession to be sent to the states for ratification.
Surprised they don't even have that on there.
I don't know what I just searched for July 6th.
Oh, yeah. So if you zoom into that, okay, because the amendment also made provisions to fill a vacancy in the office of the U.S. president and created a procedure for the vice president to serve as acting president if the president were to become disabled. This is what could be coming up big time. And then if you go to that 25th Amendment of the Constitution, it's really weird because the way that came through, it was a Democrat president who, of course, wasn't elected, the vice president, right? If you look at the Civil Rights Act that comes in 64, it was the Republicans who voted for it in both the Congress, both houses, right? It was not the Democrats. Only Johnson signed it. They all still wanted to have segregation. Mm-hmm. So people think that it's Democrats that freed the slaves again, or civil rights. It's the Republicans again. So the fact that this is kind of the astrology, like it follows it, but there's always like a year gap. Sometimes it's more exact. We're in the year gap. So you got to take 65 as 2024. You got to take 63 as 2024.
Hmm. 63 is where we are. Is that it?
Well, we're actually at 65, but there's parts of 64 at the end, and 65 is 2024 for real, right? 63, you can put it as parts of 2024, but there's more stuff happening now than there was then. I mean, in a way you can say outer planet wise as far as moving signs, but that's the Pluto-Uranus conjunction, and this is where, there was something about the councils of ministers of Soviet Union approved sending 2,500 Soviet Army instructors to North Vietnam, not to fight in combat, but to train North Vietnamese troops. So then the USSR, is going to help the Viet Cong up in the north.
On how to use surface-to-air missiles against American airplanes.
Yes.
Between 10,000 and 12,000 Soviet advisors would see service in Vietnam War. Hmm. Well, then you have Saudi Arabia and Kuwait the next day agreed to partition the neutral zone.
Yeah, and that was like an old agreement, and it's about the oil. And then what just came out in this last couple days, and the Saudi Arabia and dealing with oil and the US dollar and the petrodollar. They didn't re-sign the petrodollar contract, and they are going to accept currency now from every other currency. So the US Saudi petrodollar pact ends after 50 years when Nixon changed the currency to fiat-based currency and a petrodollar. So our dollar now is no longer the dominant way you can pay for oil. So the agreement between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia was just allowed to expire. So there is no more petrodollar. So now you can go buy oil with the yen, with every other currency. You don't need to buy it off a U.S. dollar. So the U.S. dollar now is horrible. And this was all done under Nixon. And ironically, this is where we change the whole system of how it works, and it's oils exclusively in U.S. dollars, invest in surplus oils and U.S. Treasury bonds, and our bond market's horrible, and everything that's happening right now with inflation today did not go down. The Federal Reserve said we're not pushing it down, and also said the Biden administration lied about the jobs.
That can't be true.
I mean, I just, I'm somebody who likes to show people because they might not believe. And here's the Fed chair today. Powell admits the Biden admin is overstating jobs because they're part-time jobs. They're from all the immigrants coming in, and we get the actual number of employed workers plunged by 408,000.
Wow.
So they only talked about the gain jobs of part-time jobs to we can't call it migrants. No citizens born in America are gaining jobs. They're losing jobs. 408,000. And the US petrodollar is gone. So that's the other thing that you kind of mix with this Russia thing and America and the Cuba thing is it's right when America's knees are starting to get buckled extreme financially, division at home and abroad. So you have to kind of look at it like it's sad that I don't like the Fed, but at least the Fed is willing to at least say, no, that's not the real number. The reason why we're keeping the rates up is because it's not going great, right? And they also, which is also why the unemployment rate actually went up to 4% for the first time in over 3 years, despite this marvelous increase in payrolls that they were trying to say. And now it's a stunning 9 million, right? So, which hasn't had a new high late 2023. It's back to where it was last summer. It's now a stunning 9 million when it comes to the actually employed workers, right? So this is showing the employment lacking of 9 million people. That what actually is been shown is that what the administration has been reporting on is, I'm not kidding, estimates off spreadsheets.
Wow. There's so much, I'd be interested to know what connects with numbers or math. I don't even know if this is something that we could connect. But because I went into a footnote not too long ago on an article trying to read about I don't remember the name of the poll, 525 poll. How do they collect the data? And
I just thought we'd look at 1965 American economy, and they say industrial production rose 8% in the past 12 months. Purchasing power, the average weekly wage. Wait, 65. Average weekly wage of manufacturing stands at a record $106 a week back at 65. A gain of $3, right? So they're just showing the economic expansion, set records in production, sales, employment, income, and living standards. Now we're seeing the opposite. The
year the Fed and LBJ clashed. What was that?
Yeah, so this I think is about rates. Few challenges to the Federal Reserve's independence have ever been matched to the drama of December 5th, 65. Fed Chairman Martin Jr. had been convinced the Board of Governors to raise the discount rate amid signs that the economy was starting to overheat. Physical stimulus, increased spending on the Vietnam War, expanded domestic programs from Johnson's Great Society, and a tax cut enacted in 1964 had raised inflation warning signals for Martin. That's all happening right now.
But that all and that all kind of happened, if I'm remembering my American history correctly. JFK was not wanting to expand the war in Vietnam as
Correct.
much, right?
That's one of the
And
reasons why he
so-
didn't stay around.
And so suddenly when he's gone, the economy is doing wonderfully and they are investing in the war, are starting to
Yep.
invest more in Vietnam. So, which is, again
Yeah,
goes
and-
along with that late 30s going into the 40s transit as well, right? Where the end of the Depression really is fueled by the war.
Correct. And that's where the rates start rising because of the worry and the battle and the tax battle, and that it's not being brought in. That's pretty crazy because that's what we're in. And then economists view today the 1970s as a lost decade for monetary policy because that's where inflation goes to its highest. But we're actually at the same inflation because if you add the inflation of over since then, not just this last 4 years, but it's never stopped the inflation, right? Look at how everybody was making $100 a week in a manufacturing job in 65. You know, that's more like $1,000. It's a 10 times inflation rate. Really look at it. So it's kind of interesting to see that the correlations here is like, okay, well then it's a Vietnam War and the USSR is over there on that side, right? But to me, I think this is the actual moment now because I think it all comes under, and this is where, as an astrologer, it might be weird. I really do believe it's I'm not going to call it the curse of Tippecanoe. It's the Jupiter-Saturn alignment presidency that always comes in and does the weirdest situations to the president that comes. I actually think that's why Trump chose not to actually want to be the president.
You think he
Yeah.
knew it was going to get this bad?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think so too. I'm joking, but like, isn't that a theory that he's just waiting, he's lying in wait to come back and open the camps?
I mean, think of like all these presidents that we're looking at their faces. And, you know, Ronald Reagan gets shot, right? His first couple months into his presidency. George W. Bush is elected by the Supreme Court. He also has a shoe thrown at him, but
he also almost choked on a chip or something, right? I mean, are we talking about George W. Bush? I remember that story coming down the line that he was laying on the couch eating chips or something and almost choked to death. So he could have choked on a chip.
I think it's weird because they show like George W. Bush here living did not die in office, and then they're at Joe Biden living with it still pending.
Well, we don't know. But, you know, the other thing that's interesting is that I also had mentioned that Pope John Paul II, someone tried to assassinate him in 1981. So I don't know whether, obviously, he didn't become Pope. I don't think he became Pope in 1980, but I don't remember.
No.
I don't know.
But that's the thing is it's more like sometimes it's a direct hit and it happens really quick. Although that's the weird thing is there's a lot of questions with AI now, and it's all over Twitter today about an old video of Biden right here. Look at the skin color of his face and his neck. And this is in 2020. That it's not the same guy. So there is a question like, was he in office and maybe did he actually pass, and that they, instead of injecting steroids and amphetamine, put up a mask figure and an AI like Kennedy? Because they're willing to lie to the public and say he just has a little virus while he's dying.
Right.
Also in the book, it goes into that Richard Nixon, when they were both senators, had offices next to each other, and actually Kennedy and Nixon liked each other, and Nixon kept it secret and actually went to go help Kennedy when he was sick multiple times, right before coming into office and after.
But you know what is so odd about this, David? Like this is what just struck me, that why are we obsessing over we've got to keep this man alive when it's not the man? It's not supposed to be the man in our country. It's the Constitution. It's it's the office, right?
It's the power.
And so if the president dies, that's fine because we have something in place. It's not like it's King Henry VIII and you're trying to keep him alive, or it was Charles II, right? Trying to keep him alive with the bone skull powder, which is another show if everybody wants to watch that, History of the Stars, where we talked about Charles II's secret skull medicine.
Right.
But it's not like you have to keep the body of the king alive because you're not quite ready for the transition and there could be a civil war, right? The idea is we have this thing in place. So that's what tells you there's so much more going on behind the scenes, that there are so many people who are invested in keeping a particular person in the presidency. I mean, I know this is obvious to most people, but I just felt like I had to say it because it's like there's so much here about the nature of power. And you started this by talking about Pluto and Aquarius, right? And that there's something about it dispersing, right? But so I guess it's the old forces, because I think, as you've said before, we're not fully out of Pluto and Capricorn. So those things, they're not dissolved yet. They're continuing to try to grasp for staying power.
That's a great point. It's Capricorn's about planning, so it means that keep the show up. We know that we have another last chance to use the plan. That there's a higher part of the plan that's more important. So keep the person alive or looking alive or whatever for us to do. Because you have to remember, sure, it's not so much about Capricorn during JFK's assassination.
Right.
But it is an interesting thing to look at it like, well, they had in place whoever the forces are behind all that, which Biden can release today. Trump released all enough for Biden to release because Trump thought he was going to stay in office. But Biden didn't release it for some reason. Well, that's because he's going up against RFK.
Right.
So what's even weirder is like Johnson, the plan was an act, he knew what to do. And then even to put a new amendment to the Constitution his first year as the president about what to do in that scenario when that's happened multiple times before.
Exactly.
It's not new.
Yeah.
Right? That's a little weird. We haven't had to go through it since Kennedy either. Right? So it's been 60 years and now 61 since we've had to see a president fall in office. You can say Richard Nixon, when he resigned, was a big deal because that's different, right? And he's not on it, but that's a really weird situation. And then his interviews coming out that two of the people that were involved in the Watergate of going into the hotel and getting it were actually CIA agents, right? And how, he thought it was just better because he wanted to save his own life. He didn't want to become the next JFK. He was friends with them. So it's a little weird. And then Hillary Clinton's on the legal staff of that. That's her first big government role. That's where she meets Bill Clinton through Watergate. So there's a little bit of weird stuff there, but America has not had to go through this in a modern moment. Back then, it's like, okay, are the TV ears right?
Right.
Am I hearing this correctly? Right? And at the same time, there's the space race happening, which is happening right now exactly at the same time that we're seeing the Russia-America thing now. The fact that Russia is now in Cuba with nuclear weapons is crazy, but it's also now we're really in the astrology of that repeating pattern while the space race is happening. Like Russia just put up their space, like their version of, we have Space Force now, just put up their version of a satellite that takes down other satellites just 2 weeks ago. China just landed on the backside of the moon, while Japan just failed with independence. America's trying to go back to the moon with Artemis right now. America just launched a Boeing rocket just the other day to get 2 astronauts to the space station because we're not going to use Russia anymore. All in the last 2 weeks. So there's the space race going on, and that's what's weird is JFK doesn't get to witness the moon landing, but the same rabbit ears are moved around on the television to be like, am I hearing it right? Did he just die in Dallas? Which was a bad thing, right? Because you have to remember that there was a lot of Republicans in Dallas back then, and they were putting out there in the newspapers right before JFK came into town, like, you need to get your word out there, because they felt like he was not being independent. He started talking about, because down in Texas, there wasn't like today's Republicans, but there were like the Republicans that were just like, there needs to be more freedom aspects. There needs to be more of this. Like, he's kind of starting to dog whistle about other things, and the stuff that's been happening about what's happening in the other states, civil rights movements are not going well. So we need to tell him what's up. So it looks bad to like, did one of the Republicans do it? Right? Like when you go to the museum, that's what they show is they give you like the precedent. They show you all the newspaper articles by the Republicans the day before. And that was where the FBI started looking first. But then they found the shooter pretty quick. So it was like, was he hired by Republicans or not? And that's where it gets really weird is like, where did all that come from? So I don't know. I do feel that there is now correlations from every angle. And to me, it is, we'll just call it the curse of Tippecanoe. Although I don't believe because it's because of, the great white fathers, because what does Kamala Harris do now?
I mean,
or Hillary, but that's what's weird is that, there does feel like the weird repeating of history has to hit, and it just hit. Because it's like, where does the war go from here? What is Biden's reaction? Plus, there's the other war happening right now in Israel and Gaza, and there's the ceasefire talks with the UN, and those are not, they're failing right now. So it's pretty wild.
The thing that I think is weird, so if we think of, okay, so we can see where we're connected to 1965, and we know what comes after 1965 and 66, 67, 68, right? That the thing I've always been most fascinated in about this era is you can have JFK assassinated, and then by, I think it's 1968, isn't it, where Robert Kennedy's assassinated and Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated. And I've always thought, wow, I mean, I know I've asked my mom, what was that like to be alive at a time when leaders were being assassinated in public places in the United States? Because, we see all of our gun violence and all of our issues of whatever sort, but it's not usually that dramatic of an assassination, right? But even,
well, I think it's because they should have just let people continue to do duels.
Well, they should have.
You know what I mean?
I wonder if that would have helped, because that'd be actually out in the open, and that's no fun for all these people who like to have these things happen behind closed doors. And there's just so many people invested in orchestrating things these days.
Well, because like when we covered the duel of Aaron Burr, right? Like it's people dress up to show up to this thing.
But remember, it was secret too. Like
it was secret.
You had to keep it under wraps that you were doing it, but you do get all dressed up, and you bring your doctor, and you bring your friends, and there's the whole etiquette for dueling.
And there's a gentleman's agreement, which I think that's the highest gentleman's agreement. Like, you're not going to cheat. This is to the death, or at least for the shot, right? Like, we both get one shot. We both take the same amount of steps. We turn and fire at the same time, right? So there is like a gentleman's decorum, which I would say that's pretty high. But then there's an embarrassment for your family or an embarrassment for the people that you represent or in your life. There's an embarrassment if you fail. And there's like, it's an equal footing. So actually, I think duels are kind of like a good thing. But people today would be like, oh my God. But it turns into, like you said, backdoor, mafias, da-da-da. And I think that's where it gets a little weird, is that now, yeah, like we're seeing it though, like Iran's president just in a plane crashed. Another president with all of his cabinet, I think it was down in South Africa or wherever, just went missing.
Right. But we're seeing
it a lot, yeah. Or the Japanese ex-prime minister, he got killed a couple of years ago. Abe. So it's happening.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was thinking is this is the part that I wonder, I don't know if this is just a little too shocking to say, but you have to wonder about the orchestration behind protests as well. I mean, it's part of the plan. It's almost, I always, throughout the last couple of years, I think about what I've learned about the 1960s and the era of protests and the hippies and all of that. And it's almost like we're trying to replicate that in different ways by having, okay, now we've got protests. So I've been looking at it in the way of students, maybe in universities, might want to participate in their own protests, and they kind of are getting into doing protests in different ways. But you could almost look at it as if there may be things coming up in a few years that people would really want to protest.
Right.
And so they're getting people, whoever would be they, might be directing people to a certain type of protest so that everybody's already on board with something that may not have anything to do with what's going to be protestable. I mean, it's just so, it's interesting how a protest can be managed with social media, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and that's what's weird, is that 60s period becomes a massive protest decade. Plus you have the people protesting about civil rights,
right?
Extreme, and then all kinds of different ones. But it also breaks out to where instead of protesting, you have people like Timothy Leary and the hippie movement, they just go live their life the way they want to go live it. Which that's why I really respect Timothy Leary, because, you know, he realized we're going to show peace and love and they're not accepting. And that's why he didn't trust anybody over 40, because they all were whiskey drinking and carried all the iron of the world, the cuffs, the chains, the guns, the whatever. So that's why he went to Millbrook and started his own thing after being the Harvard professor for psychology and taking it over and doing the experiments of psilocybin, LSD, and showcasing how great it is, and then went to public debates on television and no longer as a professor, but respected still as one. And he released his message of tune in, but tune out, right? Like tune in to tune out, right? But you're still tuning in, but to tune out and then do like your own thing. I mean, he kind of proved that's kind of the way to kind of do it, is to go live the life instead of protest against it. Just go be it.
Right. Because if you are protesting something, I think the argument would be you're keeping that in power. You're investing it with power, right? That you're against something. You're making your whole identity be about being against something instead of choosing an alternative approach, right? And people are doing that now, I think. I just saw a video of someone who was really active in the pushback against against New York's mandate of certain medical treatments. And I remember watching a lot of his live streams a few years ago, and he just had a video, and he was kind of out. He had kind of moved out to nature, and he was out with his family and you know, doing his own life and saying to people, I wish I could remember his name, but in saying to people, go live your life, right? So I think there are a lot of people, like there's the homesteading movement sort of thing that people are doing. Although I think you said recently, this is the astrology of you want to be in a city, not out in the wilds of the world. And I don't remember why you said that.
Because now with Jupiter and Gemini, that rules cities, local environments, not journeys, not living out in the open plains or like out in nature. Jupiter and Sag is about being in open territory.
Jupiter and
Sag, because Jupiter rules Sag. So when Jupiter's in Gemini, it's in the detriment. It's at its detriment. And it's Mercury's house, which is cities. Your neighbor, you know your neighbor, you know your brothers, you stay close to your siblings, you stay close to your friends that, you know, are like brothers and sisters, right? 11th house is like associates. And yeah, it's friendships, but you might not see them for 2 years or whatever. Your third house friends are the ones that are like at the royal court, because technically the third house to the sun of Leo is Libra, the diplomats that are more than a friend, but are a friend for the country and for the monarch, using old astrology, ancient astrology. So third house Gemini from the Aries 0.2 is the twins, right? People that feel like you're twin, but it also has to deal with, you know, where people can communicate. You can't be just by yourself in your head out in the open plains with Jupiter, because you're going to go crazy, you know, like at least there's a quest towards it. But I don't think people realize right now, I'm out there by myself alone. Right. Oop, what do I do now? Or how is a revolution going to happen against these bad things by yourself on 100 acres by yourself? Or even just with your family.
Correct. Because people will move out with just their family. Mm-hmm. But I think you can be sovereign and be who you are wherever you are. You can be around your neighbors and your friends and still do your own thing.
I was going to say you can do that, but there's always going to be the connection to, we need something and it's at the city. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you think about when people congregate and open, they live in Wyoming or they live in Idaho or they live in Colorado out in the boonies or whatever, they still got to go to Walmart or something to go get the big thing.
You just think like a Palmer, David Palmer.
Oh man, it's an hour and a half. Okay, we got to go. Or they don't have the tires in town here. They don't have the brakes. They don't have the oil. They don't have the thing we need. We still have to go get it, right? So Jupiter, when it's in Gemini, is always like, we can expand you quicker, faster if you're in the same environment that actually has all the little things that you need. Mm-hmm. What stops you is the big thing that's small that you don't have. Mm-hmm. That's so funny because the big thing, Jupiter, but the small thing, the small thing becomes the big thing. Right? We have everything. We have the land. We have everything. Oh, but you know what? The diesel generator, the freaking fuse box and the fuse panel fried out. And the only place is 4 hours in a town. And if you got one of those crazy people who just can't like be around a cell phone tower or anything like that, good luck. Good luck. Oh my God, I can't do it.
Well, that's why you have...
How are you a survivalist?
You have the person like your ancestor. I'm trying to think of his name. Allerton, was that it?
Oh, Isaac Allerton.
Who was the one who planned all those things so that the Mayflower people could go do their thing. Like
Correct.
He was the one negotiating, okay, you got to have this kind of ship and we need some money to buy the ship and we got to have an industry to tap into when we get there.
We have to pay the debt back and set the 50-year. He was the one who met with the natives because everybody was too afraid. My ancestor, my ninth great grandfather went, hey, let's make a 50-year treaty of there'll be no war, there'll be no aggression. So people forget that. Like they think like, oh, the white people came and killed all the Indians. Like the Mayflower and all of the first pilgrims did not kill any. It was 50 years after that the English came over and were like, this looks like colonial times for us.
It was
So
just
it's
like
not the
Pocahontas.
pilgrims. I hate when they always say the pilgrims. You really think that that Thanksgiving actually did happen? Because my 10th great grandfather and my it's crazy because I have so many relatives in Mayflower, but my 10th great grandfather wrote and witnessed Thanksgiving and brought it back to England and told them about it. So Robert Cushman. So it's one of those things to where it happened. There was 50 years of peace. And the trade aspect of it, because that Jupiter Gemini is very much like the pilgrims. You end up at this place. What are you going to do? You got to go talk to the people that are local on the land. So no matter how much you want to try and build your little pilgrim homes that are horrible and it's freezing and half the ship couldn't make it and got put on the speedwell and had to go back. So you have half the amount of people, and then some of the kids are dying, the wives are dying, and some of the men are dying. Right? By the time that it finally gets to the spring, half of the half are already gone. Right? You're at like 35 strong now. After like the 100 that you got on the Mayflower, and then 50 went on the speedwell, and then the 50 that came, you got 15 plus dead. You got all these people dead. You're not going to go make a deal with the Indians and go figure it out and become friends. And you don't know how to, you don't even know what corn and all these things look like. You don't even know what it is, right? The squash and the way that all these like North American planting, right? It's not potatoes, right? So
Right.
it's like, oh, it's all this other stuff. So and pumpkins, right? Like that stuff that, we see that spread around the world now, but back then that was not, if you're in England, it's potatoes and then root vegetables and stuff like that, where there's a whole different vibration, and there's buffalo and there's all these kind of things that are not seen. So the Indians know how to do that. So Jupiter and Gemini, it does make it to where if you really want to make it through, that also includes computers. So when you see the AI movement right now, to be afraid of that, that's how you're gonna quantum leap out of
Right.
the system actually. Right? That's the weird part. Because if you already see the petrodollar today, you see the Cuban Missile Crisis ×2, you see the way that all the cards are stacked, you see that the numbers are true that the Fed released, that no, 408,000 full-time positions were lost. 200,000 part-time jobs were added. That's still a deficit, and not long-term jobs. Then they don't even get into the numbers of how many business closures until they really finish the year.
And that just came out, looking at the numbers, and was that a story today? I didn't.
Today, the Fed Chair Powell actually came out and said, we're not changing the interest rates.
Right.
We're going to continue holding them, which, remember, at the beginning of this year was 3-4 times. By June, it'll be probably back down to 2-3% maybe. No. Right?
It's really hard to tell a big story about numbers when Jupiter's in Gemini. Then,
yeah, exactly.
Right?
That right. And then on that, so he has to give a reason why he's keeping the interest rates up, and then he gets asked, because it's a press conference, like, but the job numbers are good. Bring it down. No, they actually are not good. Right? Oh shit! The White House lied. Yeah, they've been lying, and then all the data has come out to prove that. If you see the Biden administration's target and predictions through someone, not even AI, of a spreadsheet throughout the years by implementing Bidenomics, that it would be there and that they just go off the spreadsheet and say that. Because it's the exact numbers on the spreadsheet from 2021. That's how crazy it is.
And that probably
wild?
wasn't done using AI, probably.
Correct. It was not.
That's the problem.
Right.
maybe.
No, correct.
It's
No, it was
definitely
whoever brought the
time-
cocaine in.
It's definitely time right now. I love that example of Isaac Allerton, I think, and those early pilgrims coming over. And I don't even know what Jupiter was doing back then or whatever. But you know what I'm thinking of too is that we all think of, we're going to retreat to the wilderness. We're going to be Henry David Thoreau and go off and live at our Walden Pond. But for every one of those guys, you know, he also always would go back to his community in Concord. And you can't escape without a plan and without the network, because for those pilgrims, you mentioned, okay, the Mayflower came over.
Yes.
Then the Speedwell comes over. Then I don't know however many successive ships, right? But
Well, the second ship's the Fortune.
Okay, the Fortune.
The 1621. That's where my Palmer side came in.
So, but they're only coming over because they've also been in the Netherlands for 10 or 15 years. I don't remember how long they were there. But it's not that they just jumped to the New World because of religious oppression. They said, oh, it's getting really difficult for us to practice the way we want here. So we're going to go to this location where it's easier to practice the way that we want to. And then they established a community there, got to know people, were involved in industry. They didn't just disconnect from the world. They were living and thriving there. Then they started to make the next step. So I feel like it's, you know, time for us all, wherever we are, to be thinking about, you know, keeping the communities around us, maintaining communities that will support the lifestyles that we envision for ourselves. It's time to get realistic about that.
It's time to get extremely realistic, because if you think of, I think the Mayflower and going and hitting Plymouth, remember them hitting Plymouth, they had no idea where they were. It wasn't like they had Plymouth on a map, right? Like Plymouth just happened to be where the boat, they saw land and they were like, we desperately just need to get there. We made it. Like, and it was on rocks. It wasn't like beach, right? And then right away it just turns into death, famine, and them trying to build units and trying to survive, and they don't have enough food, right? And they all have scurvy, right? Because that's what happens when you're on a ship and there's no vitamin C, right? It wasn't like there was orange trees in the winter of Plymouth, Massachusetts, waiting for you. So they're dealing with all these things, and they have to find a way to, and then they're afraid of the Indians. So that's the irony too. It wasn't like the Pilgrims came with weapons to go kill people. That's not in their nature either, right? So, but they were afraid to do it, and that's the whole thing, is like Isaac Allerton, who created the idea of like, okay, let's get a loan from these London banks. They'll buy the Mayflower. Okay, we're going to find whatever's there. But we've heard that there's fur from Jamestown, that there's like fur, it's like the fur trade and all these kind of things. And we will every year send a boat back, or maybe every couple of years, with a bunch of it and just give it to you. And that'll be the payment back, because then they'll go sell it, the bankers. And that's what happened. But the idea of going to meet with Squanto is really like the scary part. I'll just put this up because this is actually really interesting, because it's like, so as we have to remember that at the end of 1620 is when they land in Plymouth. So by 1621, they realize people are dying. There's not many people left. So it was here on the day in 1621 that a shallop, a small ship that carries both sails and oars, sailed in Boston Harbor carrying 10 Englishmen and 1 Indian. The leader of the expedition was Isaac Allerton. He was the deputy governor of Plymouth. And his guide was Squanto, the only known survivor of the Indians. Because you have to remember that the Indians lost everyone too. Because of, I guess you could call it their plague, but of smallpox, right?
Right.
So both sets of people are like, we need to help each other. And so it's, the expedition is Isaac Allerton, my direct ninth great grandfather, who sets off and goes, we need to figure this off. And although it had been a mere 10 months since the colonists had landed in Plymouth, the boat's occupants were seeking a better location for settlement. Plymouth Harbor had so many shawls and sandbars, and the Mayflower had to anchor more than a mile and a half offshore not to run aground on the low tide because it's all rocks there with no shelter yet built on land. So you have to remember, it's not like they got there and there was shelter. There was no shelter for a long time. The Pilgrims spent most of the winter aboard the Mayflower, soon transformed it into a hospital ship packed with the sick and dying. By April 1621, half their original number had died, including the wives of all the principal men, including my ninth great grandmother. Because Mary Allerton's my eighth great grandmother, and her mom died. So then Isaac Allerton married again, right? In addition to the problems with Plymouth, the settlement. But anyways, when you get to the whole aspect of it, like Squanto survived the smallpox epidemic that ravaged his village because he was one of the 26 Indians captured by Thomas Hunt in 1614 and on John Smith. And that's all the Jamestown kind of piratey people, right? And it really goes into that they form an alliance and that there was a better harbor north. And in September, Allerton organized the exploring expedition, and Squanto guided the boat around the dozens of islands and looked at the Boston Harbor, and they found better spots, and they also were able to understand how to create Thanksgiving by that November. So you have to go do it, and it's a lot. People don't believe it, but I'm sorry to say, it was a 50-year treaty. So, and that treaty was never broken. So,
and then what? 20 years after that treaty ended, you have the Salem witch trials happening, right?
Yes.
Which is interesting how quickly things kind of.
And I think
went south.
If I were to look at 1620,
that's what I was wondering. Is there any sort of similarity? I feel like I need to keep saying something.
No, you're good. 1620 is Jupiter and Taurus conjunct Pluto. So I'm doing July because we just did it, but you have to remember that they left in August. So this is like getting everybody ready. Mercury in Gemini, South Node in Gemini, North Node in Sag, Chiron in Pisces, Neptune in Libra, Uranus at the end of Cancer, and Mars in Cancer with the Sun, and then you kind of go ahead forward. I think actually it was September they leave because it's 66 days to cross. I think July is the signing of the Mayflower Compact that is what the Constitution actually is built upon too.
Dropped anchor November 11th.
Yeah, it dropped anchor November 11/20, but
it said how many days?
Yeah, 10 weeks. It had 102 passengers and a crew of about 30. It didn't make all those people. And yeah, this is whole Mayflower Compact. I mean, this is more where I think we're going, is like the creation of our own compacts between our own people. So here's the speed. Well, July. That's why I put mid-July. Mayflower left London in mid-July. I should know this history. It's my whole damn family. That's why I have it as July. And the Speedwell left the day prior and followed it. and then it ended up having to go back, and it took a bunch of the sick people with them. Oh wait, no, Mayflower set sail in early. Oh, that from Holland in July, picking everybody up and leaving in early September.
It says
Oh no, actually, right here, yeah, the gallant little ship slipped out to sea to proportion her cubic feet. Oh yeah, no, it is. That's when they do leave. Yeah.
September 26, 1620.
Mm-hmm.
Which would have actually been October.
No, September
Or did they
16th,
adjust
and then
the
OS
date?
is September 6th. So our September
it sailed
16th.
from Plymouth. Plymouth, England, or like Plymouth where? Or does
No, it
that
sailed
return?
from Plymouth alone, meaning that after it has to leave the Speedwell, there was problems.
Okay, that's the way back.
And then the trip across the Atlantic, and it's not good. It's funny because John Carver is related to a lot of people, and Sophia's part of the family, and John Holland too. And I'm also related to John Holland's family too. But yeah, so I think that's kind of where the landing is kind of where we're at now with the world. Actually, it was the Mayflower Society who sent me that picture, who has the landing at Plymouth. It's really, this is the picture. I have the big one somewhere, but so for those that are just interested because they know who I am, this right here is Sophia's line and her great grandfather.
Which one?
The guy at the top, John Carver, the guy, John Holland holding the girl and bringing her out of the boat. Okay. The guy to the left of him holding up
the oar.
The oar is Isaac Allerton, and they become the heads of the whole thing, right? And they send the Mayflower gone back. Oh wait, no, sorry. I think this is Sophia's. Sophia's grandfather is this guy, and I think it's funny that they're both holding the ship to the rocks to keep everybody together. Sorry. And then this is my eighth great grandmother, the youngest and the oldest, the last one to die too, Mary Allerton, right there, the little girl. So So anyway, I mean, I think this is kind of where people are so afraid to get to, but I think it's more about when you have the fear and you don't do anything. Like I look at my great grandfather's history so deeply because he ends up creating Wall Street in New York. Right? Like Wall Street was created by my 10th great grandfather or my 9th great grandfather after, 20 years. They banished him out of the town because he wanted money.
So that's
kind of how Salem begins. You know what I mean? But I think that's where we're at right now is like we're going to crash on the rocks, but that doesn't mean it's the end. And it's like what you do, it might feel a little weird, but you're going to have to learn how to talk. You're going to have to learn how to figure it out. And then if you sit and do nothing, well, you die. That's kind of how life works. It's not like a negative thing to say. That's just the reality check of history.
Right. I mean, that's the thing I was just sitting here thinking. This is a really great story because there's so much about it that we've always told as a founding story, but every family has a story of the people who figured it out, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we're all here. So,
right. And the whole colonial story, they use the pilgrimage as it when it's not the pilgrimage. Unfortunately, I hate to ruffle the feathers of people who believe in the colonial thing through the Mayflower. It's not. Right? They don't even want to be part of any of the politics or any of that stuff. They want to just do their religion without King James. Tell them what to do. And they didn't go mess with any Indians. They actually became friends with the Indians. So it's really weird. Because the Mayflower Society is very much about proving that every year now. They have to. the media won't talk about it. You have all these people now saying that the Mayflower is the colonials or the Zionists. Quite opposite. Quite opposite. They didn't believe in needing some new Jerusalem. They don't believe in any of that. They're the first true Protestants that really form their own government and form their own way to live and don't believe in a king and don't believe that Jesus is king either. So.
Yeah, they're the people who were imagining a new way to organize society, right?
Yes, and they create Quaker movements, and that's one of the main ones that comes out of that, but also what we know today as evangelicals, the other side of the Pilgrims become the crazy evangelicals of like Salem and all that stuff. There's a split years down the road.
How did we end up talking about the Pilgrims?
Well, it's funny because it's a 1620.
I know.
Right? So
It's
it's Jupiter on its way to Saturn. There's Saturn and Gemini at the bottom there, and here. There's Saturn and Gemini, and there's Jupiter and Taurus. So that was Jupiter, Saturn, that would meet in Cancer.
How do you know it's Cancer that this one meets?
The math in my head. Right, that Saturn.
I'm sitting here like, but I want to
like
see
this.
it.
So, okay, I'll show you. Right, so
that's my Gemini.
this is me
rising
just
coming
doing the math in my head.
This is the kind of stuff I love to do is say, David, what do you think? And then like he proves it. And I'm like, wow, it's amazing. I'm sorry, but that's just how.
Oh, hold on. Why did it just do that? That was opposite. Jupiter conjunct.
Oh. Huh.
Okay, yeah.
So it had happened.
So Leo, right? So
Oh, okay.
1623.
And
At
before
6 degrees Leo, which is where Mars will retrograde this year, and that's where the Cuban Missile Crisis started.
all right, that's why this is coming up.
That's
then.
why that's, oh yeah, and people can't see it. That's what's really interesting. I mean, when I was doing the math in my head, I'm like, then it's not going to meet in Gemini. It's more likely going to meet in Cancer because Saturn's at the end of Gemini in 1620 and Jupiter's still in Taurus, not even halfway through. It's almost at that point. So in my head, I'm like, okay, Jupiter's going to retrograde. Okay, all right, yeah. Right, so.
And
Which that's an interesting time period that you can kind of like think about with Uranus at the end of Cancer moving into Leo during that 3-year transit of Jupiter, Saturn building up. And moving into Leo. And so, and that's where Cancer, its exalted positions are. Actually, that's a relief that Jupiter didn't meet with Saturn in Cancer because Jupiter's exalted there. Saturn's at its detriment, but, it still would have been better to have Jupiter alone in Cancer. But what's interesting is I guarantee you that Jupiter and Saturn were both in Cancer together. So if I bring it back and I look, yep, Jupiter, Saturn, Cancer. So like there it is in 1622. But that's where in my head I'm going, oh yeah, Cancer. They're gonna be in Cancer together.
was the one previous to this, wasn't it 1603? Or the conjunction? It seemed
the conjunction, yeah, in Sagittarius.
It's interesting because James became king March 24th, 1603.
And
But
look
really April.
That's what's funny is the Pilgrims leave 17 years later with the North Node in Sag, where the Sun, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn all is, and Uranus and the South Node are where Jupiter is when the Pilgrims leave 17 years later. That's the crazy shit.
Wow.
right? And what does James become at that time? He mixes the role of head of the church and the state. That's why America looks at the Pilgrims and the Mayflower Compact as the beginnings of people creating their own government, because it was the church and state together that caused them to leave and put their families to die and at risk and to find a new world, because that's the pinnacle of power at its worst. Right? Because Henry took that role, but it wasn't like he was going to church to, I'm all right, I'm the head of the Church of England. He didn't take that role. Neither did Elizabeth that much. Right?
Well, Elizabeth mediated more. She kind of created what's the church going to be like in a functional way. But James had been waiting to become monarch of England because to him, he'd finally have more power. But we talked about this before, right? That,
I think it's important to bring it up now, though.
Yeah. So he is coming from that Scottish situation where his power was contested as King of Scotland. And to him, it looked like if he was king in England, he'd actually have real power. In Scotland, he always had to negotiate it with the lords, with really powerful other lords. So he gets to England and kind of oversteps, right? He becomes more, he leans more towards absolutism than someone like Elizabeth ever would, because there's also this idea in England that you are still sharing power with Parliament, and you don't have your power unless Parliament gives it to you, right? I mean, there's that idea, this constitutional idea in England. So yeah, he oversteps with religion as a way to unify people around him, around his ideas, and alienates people like the Pilgrims, right? Or the Puritans.
Well, he also makes his own Bible. Oh,
yeah.
He makes his own Bible, which so many people use today.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is church state combined, and it's a Bible, and also becoming the first English monarch that's head of the Church of England to become very Pope-like. So it's kind of a Martin Luther moment. Kind of like, whoa, you're kind of like getting a little overcharged here about how we have to do it. Mm-hmm. Like you're getting down to the nitty gritty of how we need to serve Jesus and how we have to do this.
Right.
And you even made a book of how to do it. I can't use my Geneva Bible? No.
The Geneva Bible was the opposite of the King James Bible.
Correct.
Because the Geneva Bible was really, it was a product of that print revolution, and it was a way for people to really rebel against religion of the time by actually having the Bible in your hands, like the new AI of its times, right? That it empowered the people to have a printed, translated Bible in their own language. And so it's funny that Henry took that Bible and helped and turned it into the Great Bible with King Henry VIII on the cover sheet of it. But James commissioned a whole new translation of it so that it's actually a state Bible, right? It's the Church of England Bible, which is different from any of the other monarchs.
And just to show people, because I was going to also say that he also brings Scotland and England together to be the monarch of both. So he's doing church and state, and he's bringing Scotland and England together under him. Right. But in the King James Bible, which I just sold to a high viber, which I can't believe I had one. I do miss it. Mm-hmm. It's the first time that people, because the Geneva Bible doesn't have this first entries of the genealogy. So it kind of is a weird way of like trying to show this, like the genealogy of the Old Testament to the New Testament, where Adam and Eve sit, where the archangels sit, but throwing the king into all of that, which actually is a little bit like Muhammad and the followers of Muhammad in, different Muslim traditions, right? Especially like there, because it starts to put this huge emphasis that this Holy Bible and all these amazing things, that it's all done under the head of the so he's like, it's like the Pope. It's like he's becoming a Pope, an English Pope.
It's really interesting, this, like that diagram with the circles and everything. It's like the lineage of all of the great
this is where
people.
I spent the most time when I had it for the last 3 years, tripping out about it all coming back to James.
What's in the middle of this one? I can't see.
It's all alphabetical order. So
the one on the right, what's that little, is that the Bible at the end?
So yeah, like Jacob. Oh yeah, by law, by nature, Christ, Mary. I think this goes into the disciples, their lineages, their connection. It goes into archangels. So in this one, here's David. So the connection to King David and Solomon, Nathan, right? Like, but that's what's weird, is all of this goes into trying to connect the monarchy with Christianity. Like,
right. It's showing especially kings, right?
Correct. It gets
Christ's line. Wow.
Yeah. This is what people don't get to see. But this is also a 1568 Bishop's Bible. Right here. If I go back, which I was informed yesterday by Robert Phoenix on our show that Speaker Johnson is trying to create a state convention to try and bring church and state together. I told him that it's going to fail, but that idea gets done through, when you start looking at all these family trees and start bringing it, like Jacob in Egypt, when it gets to the monarchy stuff, to me, what it feels like when I read that Bible physically, an original, when I'm turning the pages and it gets to, okay, this is the Holy Bible and all that stuff, and we're going into the Old Testament now. It's like, yeah, hi, I'm James, and this is all commissioned by me, and look at how it all connects to me. Same way that popes do it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where, I hate to say it, but like me having a King James Bible is kind of, well, I don't anymore, but it's everything that my line of my family went against. Mm-hmm. Especially like when they go to the New Testament here and they really go into the newly translated out of the original Greek, and the way that they show a lot of this stuff, it's very much Hermetic artwork too. So it's mixing the Renaissance period of alchemy, Hermeticism, and all that. And it's also taking a lot from Rosicrucianism at the time and people like Robert Flood, John Dee, and all that, and mixing that into this in the style of the artwork. Because this is Hermetic.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as I'm looking at
sun,
it. Is that
the moon.
Yeah.
Right? It's all Hermetic.
And it's taking that familiar form. So if you were a scholar who did know that, who knew something of alchemical drawings or that work that was out there, this is taking and this is inserting into it here's where the real power comes from. But it also, doesn't it kind of look like the Kabbalistic tree? Or like
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
And that's where Hermetic art, especially like Robert Flood, mixed a lot of that in, but so did John Dee. So did Nostradamus, but we don't have artwork from him, but talked about it.
But here, okay, so this is probably really too far out there of a connection. But at the beginning of the show, when I put up that map of the Cold War world, right? It's showing you, here are all the things that you need to believe, or here's how the world's divided up. And this again is kind of taking the concept of categories and divisions, and it's showing you, here's the official belief system that James and his commission.
And you know where that moon is sitting in?
Gemini and the Pleiades.
Pleiades. There's the seven sisters.
Or is that Taurus? Is it Gemini? Taurus, Gemini?
It's well, back then, the Pleiades, I think, was that 29, 28. Yeah. So it's Taurus, because that's where the moon exalts to, right?
What's that lion doing right there? And then like a thistle, I think, which is the Scottish symbol.
Right. Yeah, here I can.
Although the lion.
And so they have Peter. Look at that. Peter sitting right there at the top. And do you see the lion here? And over here is an angel. Right? And then so look at that star line right there. And how it goes up across. That's like into Cancer, into Leo. Because the sun and the moon are going to always sit in their respected zones. High above.
Mm.
Right? And then let's see what's at the bottom, because that's always at the bottom is...
There's the bull, or, okay, so it's like the Gospels each have, each of the Gospels, the four Gospels, are connected with one of the fixed signs, right? So there's Leo, and
really that's Scorpio at the bottom.
And is that Taurus then on the other side, or right there on the left?
Oh, you see the bound up
what
bird.
Was that? Is it a bird or like a...
On the anvil.
Is that a bird or like a mammal of some sort?
Looks like a squirrel.
Yeah. Interesting.
There's the eagle to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And then right here. There's the bull right there. Mm-hmm. So I laugh because I'm an astrologer, and I know that there's a lot of people trying to come back to the King James original 1611, because the new King James Bible is even more translated incorrectly of the words. So like in Revelations, like when they talk about like that you know, the Antichrist is going to, you know, put a stamp on something, right? Like in a stamp on. Actually, the King James Version original is in. The Geneva Bible is in, but they put it as on. Or today's Bible is as on. So people have always looked at it as, oh, it's on. It's going to be put on me. But all the translations are in. It's going to be put in you. So that's another reason why my predictions about the shot were that, because I knew the translation was in. But that's what's... I find it weird, though, because we have this huge Christian revolution, which I have nothing against. But it'd be interesting for them to actually describe to me why I could take every alchemical hermetic drawing, connect it with the four fixed signs, connect it with knowing where the moon is exalted with the Pleiades. So technically it's actually sitting, you know, at the edge of Taurus there. Actually, that's where my moon is, ironically, 28 Taurus. That's like where the moon is. And then the sun being where Cancer and Leo come in, right? That you can't make that up. And that's sitting with Jehovah, the original name of God, right? So, plus every not Rosicrucian, but every Freemason in Freemasonry, this is where you get the tents with all of the different teachings that they teach you of the degrees and what you need to go through that are all in Freemasonry along the sides.
Yeah, it all.
And so that's what's funny is like, it's said that it's the work of John Dee, but also it's the work of Francis Bacon and so forth with Shakespeare's works. But a lot of this is connected also to possibly being the actual translators of the King James Bible for these kind of things. Especially because it's so weird that in Apocrypha that is in this book, that's where in the spirits book that John Dee and Edward Kelly do, that the spirits they talk to and the archangels they talk to continue to tell them to go to Apocrypha to look it up, which is already, I guess you could say, not good because it's not authorized canon book, but it's in the Bibles of those times. And that's where they talk about spirits and how to take a evil entity out of people and all this stuff.
We know James was interested in all that.
He was.
With his demonology.
And so he kept Apocrypha in. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really interesting that there is a hand played that it is in those astrologers with this Bible as far as like codes. So, because there is Hermetic artwork everywhere and there is the math, like, so if you were to just look at this, like this page, right? The first book of Moses and Genesis, what does that look like in the drawings of John Dee's work? Looks like a John Dee work page. Like it looks like what he used to draw.
But it's
even the way that the words are broken into the Y, right? The creation of the world, right? And then the way that you look at it too, like letters and understanding the men of letters, but also understanding the way that they're all positioned and the way that the cross is not there, right? So he's telling you that the T is right, the cross starts here where the N is right here and then goes up to there and goes up to there. I got to do a Hypergate 4. Yeah,
there's a lot because
the Book of Palms,
the way
right?
that it's made overall is so much more. I think we talked about this too in our show. It's the whole thing's meant to be visually appealing and poetic, right? That there was a lot of attention put into the reception of the King James Bible and trying to make it something that could compete with entertainment of its era, right? That that you can see why a group of people who were against the main, like the Church of England, they could have been against this because it was too decorative and there was too much attention paid to, like, look at the typeface. I just pulled up like the original Geneva Bible, which I think is the one that they had, right? That the Pilgrims would have had. Yes,
but they did bring King James Bibles as well.
Did they?
Just for.
But if you just
because it was a newer Bible, better quality text in for Old Testament, New Testament, yeah.
But a lot of the dissenters kept using the Geneva Bible, and if you look at it, like this looks like fancy text to us, but it's not, and that's just the text of the day. And then they have these sorts of decorative letters that was normal for the beginning of a section. But if you look at the King James Bible, there are messages in there, and it's not. And what's so funny is that you're pointing out how it looks like a Hermetic text, but it's embedded with these images also of the reign of James. So James has inserted himself into it by having like the decorative art of the thistles and these roses that are sort of the English. I don't even know what the English part of it is. The thistle, and someone else will remember, hopefully in the chat, and tell me. But it's decorated with kind of the monarch's symbols. And also in another part of the diagram, you could see these shields that look like they're part of James's coat of arms.
Right.
And so embedded in it is familiar imagery that you'll accept as this is, oh yeah, this is the Bible and we should be understanding all these things about the world and how it works. But then he's inserted his personality in it and his power so that it's connected more, so that now, we really, a lot of people really romanticize or really see the King James Bible as their religious document, right? And it is, because it was so well done and orchestrated, and it was it was commissioned to be very scholarly. So yes,
Right.
it was it was an excellent Bible for its time, but it is also embedded with this royalist, monarchical agenda as well.
Right.
And so I don't know. I'm also still thinking about this whole idea of trying to get the states to come together to get rid of the separation of church and state. I want to definitely look into that, because that's what we're supposed to be, not wanting in the midst of our Constitution. I don't know. That's just me.
No, so like here's a good John D illustration, what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Right.
Which
Or
one is that from? That's
that one's a title page, General and Rare Memorials Pertaining to the Perfect Art of Navigation, because he was the navigator. He was the one who created the map. He's the one who created the British Empire term, literally. Or here, right? Like when you start actually looking, you go, okay, whether it's inspired by, or was there a hand in there, right? The hand is there.
I wonder if John Dee was active in. When did he die again? I don't remember, because I know
he died at the very end. He died with James in power, so he died at the end of the 1600s, or the beginning of 1600s.
That's what I was wondering, if he was already gone, or if he had any sort of hand in helping.
I mean,
with
he
the
did have
illustrations?
the library that when Mary was queen, allowed him to do, because of all the monasteries that were being ransacked that were Catholic, and that he didn't want to lose all the things that these monasteries had, and they needed to have like a library of all the information for the monarchy. So he gets to have the library at his house, and the Queen commissions that, and he has that all the way till after the Spirits and Edward Kelly and their journeys. And where do all those books go? Nobody knows,
Yeah, people took him long.
But it's part of what I believe. My Hypergates, which I'm putting out something in the end of this year, of showing that I can prove that there's a hidden secret, that Nostradamus said the same thing, that he had his library, but he burned it to his son Caesar. I believe that burning it into the ether is giving it to the next astrologer that actually knows what they're doing, which is John Dee, who happens to be, which I've proved at the same time that Nostradamus is in France. John Dee's in the same town teaching, and people are going through the windows at the university that's in France to try and hear John Dee. And that's when John Dee becomes huge, right after that. And that's also when Nostradamus steps down as an astrologer. Like, you don't hear about anything after that. That that John Dee must have given that torch to someone else, like William Lilly or whoever.
I wonder who it was.
Or even Francis Bacon, maybe, or somebody. But
he did not really care for James, but he was forced to.
Correct.
Because James didn't really approve of his work, right? And made him do trivial things that he didn't really want to do. So if he had any part in, I mean, I don't know. I wonder what he would have thought of some of his styles of artwork being used for this Bible that supports the authority of James the First.
I mean, that's where, like, here's in mathematics and John Dee's work, the elements, right? Hello. Look at that. Imprinted and, I'm going to take me out for a second. Or, I'm going to have to take me, or maybe I can take this. Here we go. Hello. The lines, the way that it's drawn is exactly like the first 40 pages of the King James Bible. And what does it say at the bottom? Oh, imprinted in London by John Dee. Right? So.
Yeah, so the...
in the way that you follow up the sides, I've actually covered this in my last Hypergate, that you actually get to, here's the moon, here's the king, the sun, left side, right side, same thing.
What in the world is that thing right there at the top?
That's
that
Uranus.
Lucifer
That's
falls?
Kronos. That's Saturn on top of the world with his control, but locked in. So this is how they knew about the outer planets, which I've proven in Hypergate, but they knew. They knew it stopped at Saturn, but they knew that there was something on the horizon of eternity. And if you see, there's the seven sisters again, right? That's where they call the heavens, right? From Gemini to Taurus. That's why I did, what was that?
Purgatory.
Purgatory, or Rising through the Darkness. As I proved that the North Node, the eclipse is there, that this is a time that we're not in a lockdown. You can go to heaven, just don't follow the purgatory laws, which are the seven sins. And it was in 7. But it's exactly the same as the New Testament.
But replacing all the
with
pagan
the same
elements
correct. And
with
correct
Christian.
with Christian, and it's the same lines. John Dee always drew in these lines. So even the whole Bible has these lines.
What do you mean,
in between
boxes?
pages, in the boxes? John Dee always drew in lines, and he drew in his secret decodings in lines like that too. So it's guaranteed at that point where it's like, and these are all the scholars of Hermeticism and the great works and geometry. And so here's the math 1 through 10, because this is a dedication down here to the arithmetic, but it's through Pythagoras, right?
Is that a Gemini thing down there, or what are those people hugging there? I wonder.
Oh yeah,
I see the numbers.
This is about Mercury right here. See the staff, right? What's to the left? Gemini. What's the right? Virgo. Hold on. There you go. Music and arithmetic, math. That's mercurial. There it is. Mercury right there. There's a Mercury right there, right? What's at the bottom of the new? What's at the bottom of the King James New Testament book? Will it go down farther?
You did have it. There was like a little Cupid thing or something, wasn't there?
Yeah. Oh, here we go. a winged, right here, winged. Oh, I hate that it does that with this thing. It won't let me save images. Let's put it under my downloads. That's how people that follow Christianity, and especially they all follow the King James Bible, don't realize that they've been conned into astrology. I mean, it's right there, right? The way that the names go up, the little things that are shown to go there, the lines on the side are the same, right? The world at the center, and in this one, they have the world here, and this is, of course, a big symbol in Christianity, and especially from the times of, what do you call it, the Holy Wars and the Templar Knights, right? Is a Templar Knight symbol. But
the lamb or whatever that is.
Correct. And it's kind of interesting because like they show this as like, okay, you know, these are probably like apostles or whoever they might be, but they're the ones representing Saturn and also Saturn, the god that we think that you associate with is Saturn.
I just think it's so interesting if you look at this picture.
Because it's funneling it in. Do you see that?
Funneling it in.
It's not within the clouds.
What is?
Like if you see the separation of the stars of the sun, the moon, and the clouds are like smoke funneling and trapping it all into this world.
That's what I was noticing. That so if you look at the other one, there's the box in the middle, right? The regular rectangular box that's got the words.
Correct.
But then all around is like clouds, and then you've got those people. Here, it's all built and structured.
What is this?
There's like these curly
Is that a
Qs
W
and all
or is that a double V or a double 5 that equals a 10?
I don't know.
That's a double V. That's what in his teachings in the hieroglyphic monad, hieroglyphus monicus, is about understanding the Pythagorean math, and everything needs to equal 10. So this is a trick of W when really it's 2 V's. 10. So what's weird is if that was an X, what would that be? The next testament of our Lord and Savior. Right? From the original Greek, and with the former translations diligently compared. And so that was the thing, is they compared the translations on the side of the Bible, right? To try and say, this is actually, you know, because what's weird is it's the original Greek, Roman, right? Which is really weird because, you know, it goes to like Latin through the Catholic Church, right? Like, you know, so it's not like we're decoding the Latin translation, we're decoding the original Greek. But it's so funny because the Romans and the Greeks and the Jews were not friends at all. There was a huge rift. So it to me, it's this, to get to the original Greek is also another message of Hermeticism. Like, no, we're not going to use the Latin, because all of John Dee's work goes back to the Greek letter system. There is no Q in Greek. And all science is based off the Greek letter system. The alpha, the omega, not the Latin, not Judaism, not any of that.
Right. I mean, it's coming out of that Renaissance era, going back to the ancient texts and trying to get as close to the original as possible, and the influence of all the philosophers. And I mean, that was the language used.
Yeah.
at the time of Jesus too. So
Yeah, in 1611, right? And to me, maybe this is the symbol right here of like on the anvil, the sacrifice that people are taking by believing this version.
right, that you
Because you want me to, you want me to,
I wonder what that animal is.
you want me to blow your mind for a second?
Mm-hmm.
So if you take Robert Flood, who's before all of them, and where his work for not just Rosicrucianism, but also in alchemy and Hermeticism is top notch, to say the least. So if we were to look at this, what is it that he is implying whenever there is an animal that is sitting on top of the earth, that is the stupid, unconscious human, right? That is using this idea of the science, which doesn't understand that its fated chains are to the awakened human, that is celestial understanding. That's the crown that sits over her head. That then she's aware that she is chained to the Almighty. And this is where they know about the outer planets. Aquarius, the humans, Neptune, the trumpets and the angels of trumpets with wings, and Pluto, the cherubs that have the darker wings and that rule death and serpents and so forth. Pluto. This is the Saturn's, celestial, but really you could look at that as like the asteroid belt too. But really they knew because they show the planets, Mercury, Venus, right? They show them, right? What's crazy is that's an old depiction of Mars.
Where is that?
Right there. Mars is not
I see.
the 70s Mars you think about, right? Because the sun exalts in Aries. It almost looks like the symbol of Eris, right? Like in Jupiter and then there's Saturn, right? They have them all right there. You see how the moon is coming off too, and off of her breasts there is a crescent moon, and the other crescent moon, which then equals a star, the sun and its reflection. The sun is what's giving the light to the stars. They knew that. But that wasn't the science at the time. Because this is in the 1500s. Yeah. And the trap that people live, right? 1 foot, the Pisces, 1 foot on a rock above us, and the other in the waters, right? This is the Pisces, conscious, unconscious, but the worst is the humans that sit here and follow the I don't know if you remember during the pandemic, I called this Fauci.
Yeah.
He looks like Fauci. And the elements referring to the zodiac.
But what are these things like over here where Saturn is connected to those two Saturns? What's that? What is that?
Oh, so Sun, Moon, Saturn, Venus, Venus, Saturn, Moon, right? So if we look, Homo, and then, so here's the man. The male is always on the left. The feminine in all Hermeticism is on the right, right? Okay? She is looking to reflect off the moon. The male is accepting, receiving the energy of the sun, right? Leo sits right underneath the masculine sun, right? On the feminine side, that's where you get Venus, but this is where it gets into weird. To crack this one, it's taken me a long time. This is a lot like Ptolemy's deacons and the original traditional deacon. So in Leo, the first deacon is Saturn. In Aquarius, you get to where you start to see these. It's opposite. right? So they show the sun, they show Saturn, they show the moon, they show Venus. But really what it is the masculine energy, and then the feminine energy is the double Venus moon is feminine. The double Saturn sun is masculine. Right? That there is the malefic that deals with the serpents, right? That deals with the lion. So they're also showing the month. So they're showing Saturn in Leo here. So how to read the astrology. At the same time showing it in a yod, which they always do, which is kind of crazy. And then over here, they're showing Venus in the sextile here. And this is, I need to just take us off.
I get to look at it.
Venus to the right of the screen, right here. Okay. And you see that is a sextile, right? That is not a yod. This is a 150. Saturn here to this Saturn. That's why it's pretty close. But this is like the sextile between them. And then they're showing Venus. And then this is where you get into, okay, there's an eagle sitting here. And then
Scorpio.
And that's where you would associate with Scorpio. But what's interesting is also the feminine deals with 2 fish. The masculine deals with this 1 fish. But the masculine they're trying to show is like not, and Venus is dualistic in nature, but so is Saturn. So there's a dualistic in nature in both. But that masculine is either aware or it's not, where feminine kind of revolves around both more. So the feminine part of you is willing to kind of go through the conscious, unconscious, or you're fully unconscious male emotional drive, or you're fully conscious emotional male drive. But you'll always see that the masculine's on the left. And I'll just show one more example. But this is Robert Flood's best work because this is actually showing they knew about the outer planets. But if you just type in Hermeticism, Hermetic art, and we can just go right here. And this is a Robert Flood piece too. Right? This is where he really breaks up the understandings of this dualistic reality in nature, showing that we are all chained, the masculine on the left, the feminine on the right, the antelope, the lion represents the masculine, the phoenix, and this is also the Aquarius part. Now, what's crazy about it too is that it always leads up to that the wheel of fate is happening. Mercury at the center, right? And it's about the climb up, right? The sun, though, above the horizon, but also into the heavens, which there's the lines of the different angels too, to get you to then these higher levels. But it's interesting because it shows Saturn here, who's dividing the world from dark into light in time. So there's the sun at the center, and who's there? Saturn, right? So it's weird because it's like there are 2 realities. The physical reality is what Saturn represents. The higher one are the outer planets, because all the planets on the trees are the planets that are inside of Saturn. The tree of life means that you are living in a world that is Saturn-based. Also, the feminine represents the night, the masculine represents the light.
It looks like in the bottom, there are all those elements too.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Fire.
Yes,
air,
correct. Fire, right? And then this is where earth.
water and earth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But up in the middle, see how all of the different... Okay, no. I was thinking in the very middle, is that the monad or is that Mercury? Because it has that little dot in the middle.
It's that's what's weird is that it's the very first concept of the sun with Mercury is the way to heaven. Because if the sun is in Taurus into Gemini, especially once it reaches Gemini, then the sun is in Gemini, Mercury's home, Hermeticism, that the way to God is through astrology.
Okay. I finally get it. I was going to ask you that question
Right.
earlier. Why is it always Gemini? But would that be the sun's first contact with Mercury? Is that why?
It's because Mercury is the only Greek and Roman god that can go between both worlds and not lose its mind and bring the message back clearly. That Saturn can't go up into heaven. He's fallen. And neither can a man or a woman physically go back up to heaven alive unless you tap into your mercurial, hermetic, spiritual understandings and be in what? Two places at the same time, the twins.
We could go on with these pictures
And I have just
forever.
one more because this is the proof that the Bible is, this is my favorite one, is hermetic, right? That the left masculine, the right feminine. And when you look at it, this is another proof of the left and the right, the angels, the top, they always sit. And what's the same symbol in the Bible? Oh, we see the same lamb. But this is where it's Taurus, Scorpio, right? This is where the land reaches its top. This is also where the 0 Aries point and the 29-degree Pisces point is. So when Neptune's crossing here, it's a reset, or when Saturn's crossing here, it's a reset in alignment with the horizon of eternity per se. Or here's Saturn, here's Jupiter, here's Mars, here's Venus, here's Mercury, but the sun and the moon, Leo and Cancer, are always against Saturn and this other Saturn that's hidden, Aquarius. It's hidden. So they're hiding Aquarius here, but what are they hiding here? Virgo, the other Mercury. So this is the understanding of that you can't, so this would be Uranus is above the clouds, showing you where to go. Virgo is the understanding of how to digest this reality and go above too. It gets really deep. And also seeing that you have to understand the nature of this reality and your soul expression of masculine and feminine in order to ascend. Then it gets into sulfur, Mercury, and the actual original periodic table, which is the element, like the alchemical table of how to get to that place and the different salts and so forth and how to get there. But what you see on the feminine side is right here is the eggs that are dropping from the birds, right? They're dropping the eggs that are what? The two twins with the masculine tails. So these are feminine, walking to Hermes and to wake up as the feminine is the receiving sexually and so forth. So this is to receive the information. The masculine is the peacock that shows its greatness and is also the masculine are the boys playing extroverted. The peacock is the show off. The masculine is the sun. It must show its brightness. It must show it. The feminine has to learn how to receive it and understand where's Mercury pointing up to be a mother. To learn to understand why they're here, or else this place can't understand both the masculine and feminine. And the masculine has to learn to attract the feminine. And it's all with the tree of life, with all the planets. And what do you see? An X, there's a part of fortune, but there's the sun always at the center, and the arboreum, right? Or arbor, but Vita, life, and the tree of life that comes up perfectly. And then what's interesting too is this is Taurus, right? Aries, Taurus. And then you get to that Gemini. So it's about that cross point there. Everything points to that place. which unfortunately the whole Bible is this. Also, here's the masculine with a volcano and the fire pushing it up. The feminine, it's the children that you lay and that you bring up, but there's always something that you bring up. The masculine is bringing the understandings of, so the feminine is bringing in a world with a boat and earth, and a masculine is bringing in the fire and the air. And they're coming to meet and merge together. That's what alchemy is merging and bringing all into one. And that's where the symbol of oneness then eventually does become the hieroglyphic monad after this. Yeah. So anyway, that's
a great picture.
I think that when we think about the war, we think about everything that's going on right now in the world, I think that we could really go, hold on a sec. I think what it is the world so detached from what really is happening. And us doing a show like this makes them aware of the history and all that stuff, but it goes deeper into that until you fully embrace of what you're seeing. Are you sure? Are you sure that King James Bible and that New Testament is about your Jesus story, or is it really about this story? Because the denial has been so big that what do you start to see? The patterns are going to repeat until people can ascend. So
it's on me now. I mean, I love that because when I was looking at that image, I was seeing creation with the volcano. Made me think of kind of that the whole thing was propagating itself, but also ascending, like you said. So I like bringing this whole thing back to, I mean, this has been a long, I think, effort to kind of understand all these different things happening in the world right now.
Right.
And what's the significance. But I think always, it's basically bringing it back to our place within the whole thing, right?
Right.
That we are the ones attributing meaning to everything that we're seeing, or we're consuming it. We're just consuming it blindly. And I think what we just are looking at is there have been many times and places where people put a lot of effort into helping us see how creation happens. What are all the elements of life? What's our place in it? And that there's a larger structure, and that the point is really to focus on that inner work combined with the outer world, right? I don't know. I can't explain it all, but for some reason I feel better about things, and Cuba can have its Russian ships and submarines, and
I would say I love that you said that, because it's like, it's about accepting, and then it's about looking at the picture of whatever it might be, the ships, a president, a war scene. It's like how we just did it with the Bible and went, hold on a sec, look at the 100 years prior and what influenced this.
Right.
So looking at everything, I guess like Benjamin Franklin, like, don't trust everything that you hear and only believe half of what you see. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to look through the lens a little bit more. And that's what Galileo did too. It was like the first telescope. And he's the one who figured out, truly, he's the one that actually proves by looking at the moon and then understanding, oh, geez, there's some Jupiter cycle here, and then, oh wait, there's a star next to it. I don't know what that is. I'll record that. Oh, he found Neptune. Or did he know, but they keep it secret? Right? To confirm what?
Well, he probably didn't dare say, well, by the way, I also found this new planet. I mean, he probably was like, no, I think I better keep that one
what is
quiet.
His book that's so famous that he brings out in 1610 and 11, the same year as the King James Bible?
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Well,
You know the name of it?
Is that the Sidereus? I can't think of the name of
The
it.
Starry
Yes.
Messenger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all with the work of Robert Flood, John Dee, and how he even created the telescope. His drawing of the telescopes in there, his recording of him showing also the quarter moons and understanding the curvature that he can actually see, but how there's a spiritual way to actually create a telescope and where you would put the glass based off astrological geometry and using the same Greek letters mixed with this coding of Hermeticism, alchemy, and perfectly being able to do it based off work that's off images like this, that he creates the perfect telescope to see the eternal. And of course, the messenger is Mercury, so it's the starry messenger. It's the messenger of the heavens.
I mean,
that there's at the same time both books coming out, and everybody follows the King James Bible, and they're trying their hardest to teach people through that. But Galileo gets put in prison years later, of course,
or
right?
he's in house arrest.
But
I mean,
still,
but he
right?
can't. Yeah, I mean,
but and nobody goes to jail for putting out the false story of the true story underneath.
But I think what's important about that realization that both of those come out at the same time is when we look at the way that there are forces trying to contain people into certain belief systems and to make things flow towards what's convenient for the people who are in power, right? There are always efforts to create belief systems and try to corral us into the belief systems that support the people who are in power. But at the same time, you've got these pesky people like Galileo who will take a toy telescope and turn it towards the heavens and start to say, hey, I can use this to start to look at to study what's out there.
The first one to see the craters on the moon.
Yeah, when people wouldn't have even thought to do that because they'd been conditioned by belief systems to think it didn't matter, that there was nothing. They read their Bible and they heard the interpretation of the church about what was out there and believed it. For some crazy reason, someone like Galileo decides to look at things differently. And he gets in a lot of trouble for it, as other people do. And other people who aren't as well connected as Galileo end up dead,
Right.
And Galileo, because of his connections, which I think are important, I think, right, that he offends people and he has to say he was wrong in the end.
Just like John Dee.
But whose knowledge wins.
Same with Nostradamus. That's why I don't trust Copernicus. That Copernicus stole it all.
He stole it from whom?
From all the people prior to him. John Dee.
Well, Copernicus, I wonder if you're thinking of someone else. Because Copernicus was earlier, right?
I'm just saying that is he right by putting out a false version of it? Because it's Galileo who actually realizes the moon's face stays the same. Copernicus's model is close. It's taken off Ptolemy.
Is it Kepler maybe? Or I'm trying to think. Because Copernicus is the one who first did the geocentric universe, but he died before the work was published. So what he got out of was that he just died before anything could happen.
But I feel like he's part of the false alchemy. Like there's fake alchemists. I've looked at his work and I've always been like, this guy is part of a church getting people to start to have to accept something different without giving them, like, the Galileo knows he's playing with fire by putting out the starry messenger. Anybody who's smart at that time would have known messenger is not a Christian word. It's a Greek word. It's a hermetic but alchemic. It's really a astrological term. And starry, and understanding where I showed what the stars are, and then him putting it in there. And anybody with any smarts of that time who would have read any of John Dee's work and any of Robert Flood's imagery and all of that would have put together how he put the telescope together, and it's one big yod, which is God. The 150-degree angle. 60 degrees, that the actual telescope is a yod. And that's what you see in Robert Flood's work. And it's A, B, C. So all the dimensions, A, alpha is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4. And that's the fourth letter. Right? 4D. 50 is E. 60 is F. So when you start getting into how do you mind me just showing people for one sec? Like, that's it in the Milan. Mm-hmm. That's where maybe right now there is a message through everything we're all seeing, but you got to decode it, right? Because all right. So Galileo's the starry messenger. And this is where it's his spyglass. Let's not forget that. It's not a telescope, it's a spy glass. Who created spies and spy work and 007?
I never thought about that.
Who?
John Dee.
John Dee. Okay. So the fixed stars, the surface of the moon, and above all, in 4 planets, D planets, 4D, 4. Okay, swiftly revolving about Jupiter at different distances and periods, and known to none. How John Dee is that? Known to no one before the author recently perceived them and decided that they should be named the Medicean stars. And it's the year before the King James Bible, Venice. Astronomical message, right? Okay, so I'm just going to, he talks about all of his work, but there it is. A, 1, B, 2, C, 3, D, 4. There's a yod within a yod within a yod within a yod. So this is 6, 7, 8, and 9D. And the E, the 5th dimension that everybody talks about, is your eye, E. Your eye that looks through the spyglass. The glass is laid between C and D, close up, the 3rd and 4th dimension, to be able to see the 5th dimension, through to where you can see all the dimensions in the 60 degree right here. And there's 4 here, 4 planets he speaks of too, that he sees through. But anyway, and that's where, if you follow John Dee's work, or you can go to highvibe.tv and join as a member, or just purchase any of my schools, Hypergate, and you will learn about all this stuff and how the lost science of this is everywhere. And so that's what's really interesting, is that the glass has to come, and it's an opposite directing yod that way. That he used Robert Flood and John Dee's work for this, that the I, E, the 5th dimension, is what sees everything else.
I think that's a good place to stop.
Yep. So I think people should look at that up more. And I think that the history has repeated itself pretty extreme.
It is an extreme repeat of many, many, many different points.
I was showing you the Kevin Spacey interview that he just did on Piers Morgan, and he ended with Kurt Douglas, who lived a long age, and he was talking about the times of the 50s when there was the communists and they were trying to take them all down. And Trumbo had to have a different name, and that Kurt Douglas in 98 said, history repeats itself. And that's the number one thing that he's realized at 98 years old.
Yeah, he said something like history repeats itself, so you have to be ready when it does.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Nobody ever is. Or we're
and
not
that's
aware.
referring to the canceling of people. Like that happened in Hollywood in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And look at it again.
Yeah.
Or Russia and America trading nuclear fluxes over the last couple of years. Of course, it's going to come back to Cuba under the same Jupiter-Saturn cycle. So when the media tells you, no, it's just a, as we're saying for the last 2 weeks, we're going to go into Russia with the bombs, Ukraine, green light. Let's take out Putin at Normandy. And days later, they show up there. Oh, no, don't worry. It's just a drill.
Maybe because there's nothing they can do, we're just doomed. I don't know.
Well, I think they don't show, I think looking at Hermeticism, and it kind of got Hermetic here, we are in Gemini. You got to have both sides. You got to have the dark and the light, right? We see it every day. The fact is that they are trying to put light on dark that's not. So that's not science. That's not spirituality. That's dark. Like, you don't show the truth. Like, that's not truth. Like, when you're trying to just say it's just a drill and you won't give the truth out, you can't speak the truth. Like, this is exactly what happened the last time we were playing war games with Russia, and when it was the USSR, about nukes and encroaching upon what we were going to do to them and all that stuff. And then they're doing it here. And then to say it's just a drill, don't worry about it. Like, that's trying to say that the nighttime is day and the daytime is night, you know? And that's when you mess with, and trying to say that that man is a woman and that woman is a man and all that's where Hermeticism shows that you're going to go the farthest away from heavens or God or anything. So I think that's what messes with people the most, is that the flipping of it intentionally knowing. And that's when you know it's not truth. And that's what makes people more scared. It's not what's happening. It's the fact that they're being told a lie and they feel it. That's the worst thing in the world. Is darkness is no information that actually is true. And light is truth. That's it. Like, so if people kind of keep it to that, I think they're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. They're just feeling a big lie.
Right.
That's all it is. And that's the most thing to fear, because it's not true. Truth feels godly, so on there.
Yeah. Good.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us. Please share these shows. Follow us on High Vibe. Anne's YouTube is down below too. She's going to be coming in here now and making some really cool content for her own awesome stuff that she likes to do as a historian. So I'm really stoked to see more of what you put out. You already have your YouTube channel with some cool stuff, but
there will be more. But
yeah.
I'm also wanting to start something on High Vibe so that we can pursue history together. Have a little history class.
Yeah, that'd be great.
A little strange history class.
That's like I would say that's the coolest idea ever. I think people want it more than ever too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fun.
You know, it's like the real version of Hogwarts without it being so cheesy.
Hogwarts isn't cheesy.
I mean, personally, to me it always was, but you know, I know people love it, but you know, getting to the meat and potatoes, I always felt like they didn't give the
No.
right? They always kept you on the outside, like
Just amazed you with, oh, look at this and look
Yeah,
at that. And, ooh, the candlesticks are floating and
right.
the frogs are singing. Aren't there frogs singing? I don't remember. But anyway.
But you know, all that stuff is written in the history of English history of moving objects, moving stuff. The spiritual transcendentalists and all that, they used to do that stuff. That we could talk about too some other time.
We need to do that. Yeah.
All right. Much love, everyone. We'll see you in the next one. Adios.
Bye.
We will be here. There will be no nuclear bomb that kills us all.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Monster.
Attention, please.
Yo. Okay. Monster.
Attention,